Good evening. It is an honor to be with you tonight. My name is Charlie Kirk. I run the largest pro-American student organization in the country, Turning Point USA, fighting for the future of our republic. Speaking to you in my personal capacity tonight as a 26-year-old, I see the angst of young people as well as the challenges facing new parents. I am here tonight to tell you, to warn you, that this election is a decision between preserving America as we know it and eliminating everything that we love. Mr. President, you have been outspoken about the need for the silent majority to be silent no longer. So many young people are losing their jobs because of their beliefs. Some of them get physically threatened. In closing here, one last kind of piece of messaging as you hear the crowd roar in anticipation.
Great crowd.
The point is God cares about everything you do. What does God not care about what you do? God cares about what you say, who you marry, how you act, what you eat, where you travel.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Charlie Kirk Show. Back by popular demand, and from Hungary is Tucker Carlson. Tucker, welcome back.
Charlie Kirk, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for having me.
All right. So my name is Ben Burgis. Unlike Charlie Kirk, I have never spoken at the National Convention of a major political party, and I do not expect to be invited anytime soon. I also do not expect that we'll have any former presidents, or actually at that point current presidents, on the show, which, as we saw, you saw Charlie talking to Donald Trump there in the middle of that nice montage that Jake put together. And I believe that was actually the same building I was in, because he starts, you didn't see this in that clip, but he starts off the whole thing by saying, "Welcome to Arizona." So, the background looked different, but it's probably elsewhere in the building. It's a big building. But in any case, I am joined, as always, by our producer, union organizer, scholar, gentleman, Jake Appett, and also our graphic designer, J. Andrew World. And in a few minutes, we are going to watch the debate itself. And we are going to play it all the way through, because I know it's been, a long wait. The debate was on October 1st, but since they weren't going to air it until October 21st, and the deal was they got it first and then we could do it. So this is the soonest episode after that. We had to wait, 24 days between the debate and airing it, which is like, several centuries of YouTube time. But the wait is over. So we're just going to give people a few more minutes to come in and, take their seats. And then we will get started. We're going to play it straight through, except that we are going to take a little intermission between the first half and the bonus half. So there's like the first hour that was recorded as an episode, of his new show, Debate Night with Charlie Kirk. And then there's a sort of bonus hour, kind of like a post game after that. So we're going to play the first hour, which, you can see the TPUSA people cut it together with all the cross cams and stuff. And then we are going to then, take a break for a few minutes, talk a little bit about how that went. And this is a hint. So that's my take on how it went. But we're going to talk about how it went. Professor Jennifer Burgis is probably going to join us for that. And then we're going to watch the bonus half, which is the half where a lot of it was continuing the stuff we were arguing about in the first part of the debate about Charlie's alleged populism and, why he doesn't support basically anything that would make life easier for poor and working class people in the United States. No, kicking out immigrants doesn't count as something that would do that. And we continued a lot of that in the second half, but also we wandered into some other territory. And because it was, akin to a post game in that second half, we talked a little philosophy. which is something that Charlie seems to really enjoy doing. He has a long history of bringing up Plato, Aristotle, Rousseau, Hegel. He has stuff to say about all these people. You can make your own judgments about the level of reading or understanding that goes into that. But I had kind of wanted to, if I got a chance in the second half, get into that if I possibly could. But I think that a way to set up why this is something that I wanted to get into, if I possibly could, in the second half, would be to watch a clip that I've been thinking about lately. I'd actually almost forgotten about it, although I remember seeing it originally. So this is from the Michael Brooks show. And this actually, even though they're talking about philosophy, this wasn't like a segment that I was on. It's just Michael and great David Griscom and Matt Lech. I think the other day, somebody on Twitter called Jake, what was it?
Bizarro Matt Lech, and I think Jay Andy was Bizarro Griscom. So we are our own people, but I appreciate it. They're cool.
Yeah,
I missed that tweet.
Fair enough. So this is just Michael and David and Matt, but I remember this made me laugh when I first watched it. I think I think I might have been back in Michigan at that point, but I remember I was like walking the dog and listening to a little TMBS as I did. Episodes I wasn't on back then. So let's just have that clip right now.
This one really caught my attention. This is hysterical, and we haven't spent that much time talking about Charlie Kirk at all. Charlie Kirk is, of course, who funds Turning Points USA? Was that Foster Freeze?
Foster Freeze, yeah.
Okay, so Foster Freeze is an infamous reactionary oligarch. He did the infamous put an aspirin between your knees as birth control comment, I think back in 2011. Yeah. Funder of Rick Santorum and other, extreme far-right figures. And Charlie somehow got to him and was just like, man, I'm at college and I had to hear who this guy Cesar Chavez was. I mean, it's just a disaster. And this is just funny. Like, I have to say, especially in my mood of, there's just a million legitimate criticisms of campus politics, frankly, like millions. And I feel like we end up having to delineate them on like the actual left because they undermine the actual left. And like, not only does Charlie Kirk, of course, not go there because at the end of the day, he's a reactionary dope who wants to mythologize and naturalize, basically, in my view, every form of repression and exploitation imaginable. But it's like, what happened? You're gonna watch this clip. And I'm going to miss, like, what happened to Rush Limbaugh just being a fat fuck who was just an asshole? Like, what happened to, like, I don't need to read all that stuff. I have, Ronald Reagan, Reader's Digest, and the Steelers. Like, just stop doing this shit. Stop pretending that you've read this stuff. Mm-hmm. Or do it if you're going to pretend like this, because it's pretty funny.
To have the opposition party go full Rousseauian Marxist. I'm so glad you mentioned Rousseau because he was the gateway to Karl Marx. And Plato was really the gateway to Rousseau. And what the big conversation is...
You're well read, The Republic and so forth. Good.
Thank you. And Aristotle and Plato, who of course was the age-old student and teacher dynamic. Of course, Socrates taught Plato, Plato taught Aristotle. But Aristotle disagreed with Plato on one fundamental thing. He disagreed on a lot, which is private property a good thing or a bad thing? Plato said bad thing. Get rid of private property. Plato also argued against the nuclear family. Aristotle said, no, I think private property serves a role. I think that if you try to take people's stuff away, all of a sudden you're going to take away their meaning and their ability to pass on wealth and ideas to the next generation. This divide between Aristotle and Plato is playing out today in our politics.
Let me tell you something. If Aristotle was that easy to read, I would have done way better in Greek philosophy.
Yeah. So there we go.
I took political science when my youngest was born, And I remember reading Socrates, and it's pronounced Socrates, as we all know. And like Plato was not even that. Like he doesn't understand Plato.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, I will also say, I mean, on the Plato issue. So he's, this is part of what stuck in my head from that clip, that he specifically is talking about Plato. He's attributed this view to him that he does not have. Needless to say, Plato is not a communist. He has, maybe there's a certain sense in which everything would be controlled by, the philosopher kings, and the warriors shouldn't have stuff because they should just be, worried about defending the city or whatever. But it's certainly the opposite of any sort of pretense to egalitarianism.
Plato to Rousseau?
And then Rousseau, and then like the connection he's drawing there, right? Plato, therefore, Plato gets you, Rousseau gets you, Karl Marx, is just weird. And I think there are two pretty fun moments that are related to that that you can watch out for in the debate. These are both in the second half, but one is the clip we posted on Twitter, which is about the Euthyphro problem, which does in fact come from Plato, and he, I will say it's not it's not like everybody has to have heard of any of this stuff. Whatever, it's fine, right? Different people know different things, but it's pretty clear he's hearing it for the first time, and then within about literally 2 seconds, he thinks he has an answer to it, which is fascinating to me, the answer that he comes up with. And also on Marx, he doesn't bring up, well, actually he does, I think, bring up Rousseau at one point, but like in the Marx discussion, he doesn't bring up Rousseau. In the Marx discussion, he has, our good friend, philosophy professor Ryan Lech says, little known fact, the Euthyphro was really all about trashing the nuclear family. That's why Euthyphro was arguing against his father in court. There you go. Deep cut for Plato fans. But in any case, so he makes a claim about how he understands the relationship between Hegel and Marx. That's strange, right? We don't need to spoil it. You can get to that when you get to it. But one thing that I guess I do want to do quickly before we start the actual debate itself, which don't worry, we will by 8:30. But before we start the debate itself, I do want to get into a little bit of the why do this question, because this is something that will be, in fact, has been a little bit inevitably raised. The online left, the media left being what it is. This is something that people are going to are going to bring up. That they basically the arguments that will be about why you shouldn't talk to bad people, even to try to explain, well, not really to them, but to their audience, why they're wrong. So there's the editor of the Spectre Journal, I think it's called, for example, made this complaint on Twitter a few days ago. So there's the tweet. I kind of self-deprecatingly tweeted the image of me and Charlie posing before the debate, and said the debate was really good. I'm really happy with how it went, but I can't look at this picture without thinking of Lisa Simpson saying, "Dad, I told Dad that photo would come back to haunt him." So this guy, the editor of the Spectre Journal, has this tweet where he's kind of denouncing me for doing it. He brings up some of the very things that we've actually made fun of. Some of the things we'd actually made fun of Charlie on the show for in the past: the sexual anarchy riff, the conspiracy theories, which actually he did sort of bring up at one point in the second half. He kind of referenced implication conspiracy theories about the vaccines. He also said something about homeopathy, which he seems to like. And it was one of those things. It's like, do I want to stop everything and argue about this right now? Not really, right? Like, I think I would really prefer to keep hammering all the things that I was kind of originally here to do, and the kind of points that I really want people to get out of it. So he brings up all of the bad and terrible things that Charlie Kirk says and believes, which of course I agree are bad and terrible. That's why I was debating him. And he says that this means that it was bad to debate him, right? My conclusion would be Charlie Kirk believes a bunch of bad, crazy things. Therefore, it's good to have his vast audience be made aware of some of the internal contradictions in this, some of the problems with the things he believes. This guy's view apparently is that is that this is a reason not to do stuff like this. And he refers to this as platforming Charlie Kirk. So, my response, of course, was to point out that, one, to do in reverse order of the tweet itself, that this is literally not what platforming means. I was going on his platform. But the second point, which actually strikes me as much more important, because look, if Charlie had wanted to debate me, but he's like, I'll only do it on GTAA, I would have said yes, right? Like that would have been, that would have been worth doing. And even though the point is to talk to his audience, if he was here, I believe his audience would follow him. And by the way, it would be by orders of magnitude the most popular episode we ever did. So, I wouldn't hate that either. But in any case, the more important point is about arithmetic. Because, look, Charlie Kirk is the leader, the executive director of Turning Points USA, which, really, whatever you want to say about what this says about America and the world and the state of the right wing right now is, in fact, by far the largest right-wing youth organization in the contemporary United States on a sort of activist level, not just sort of adding up all the young Republican clubs. He hangs it, last year, Donald Trump, was visiting him in Arizona. He spoke at the Republican National Convention. The idea that I'm giving Charlie Kirk his big break, right? That's like, okay, I finally got to talk to Ben Burgis. So now, now people will know who I am, and I can spread all of my, right-wing ideas to them. I think it doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense to me. The man has a platform. He has a huge platform.
Yeah, man, it wasn't exactly like, all my friends were saying, hey, I really wasn't sold on this Kirk guy, but, don't you work for Ben Burgis? And he's sitting in a room with him and having a conversation without attacking him, like physically, like with that, like, having a civil conversation. Like, I guess, I should take him seriously. Like, it's pretty cool that Ben platformed him, like, I think most of your, people on the left kind of probably have their mind made about Charlie Kirk. And I think the goal, right, is to reach maybe not people who are so, set in one camp or the other.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that, sure, granted, right, the effective debate, the deal is that, by virtue of having a conversation with the both of us, he is exposing me to his audience, and I guess I'm exposing him to my audience, but also maybe this is just Eric. Okay, like, I'm pretty sure my audience already knows what Charlie Kirk thinks. Like, I don't think that, like, I don't think anybody gets to the point where, they're interested, not every single person who watches the show is a socialist. Most of them are, right? But I don't think anybody gets to be a socialist or even like, whatever. There are people who are interested in the philosophy stuff or who like really disagree with everything, but like watch it for a variety of reasons that people might watch something they disagree with. But I don't think anybody gets to be interested enough in politics to watch this show without having, like a pretty good idea that the Charlie Kirk option is out there. Which really gets to the main point for me, which is that saying, oh, we should all kind of bury our heads in the sand and not give him this great legitimacy of talking to him, even to explain to his audience why he's wrong, is, just a wildly mixed metaphors here, very much, closing the barn door after all the animals have already run out, right? That like, it's a little late for that, like Charlie Kirk, once you've gotten to the point where you're speaking at the Republican National Convention and interviewing, the sitting president of the United States, I think that you have, you're already out there in the, you've already seeped into the drinking water, right? For better or for worse, the chance to make you go away by ignoring you, that window is very much closed, even if it were in my power to do that in the first place, which it's not. Sadly, I'd love to live in the world where the arithmetic worked out such that this was actually a real concern, that like, there were, millions and millions of people, who knew who I was and knew what I had to say. And like, I was considering, whether that Charlie Kirk, it's like, okay, I think this might be a fun debate, but like, do I really want to get his ideas out there? That is, tragically not the situation on the ground right now. So given that, the question to my mind is this: how is it that you're going to reach people who might be in the process of being sucked into the Kirk vortex, right? People who might watch his might watch his show or see his videos or see him when he goes on Tucker Carlson's show, and who might like some of what they're hearing. Now, we could say anybody who likes what they're hearing from Charlie Kirk is an asshole and we hate them or whatever, right? But I don't think that's terribly productive given the math. I think that we want to reach everybody who we can possibly reach. And of course, debates do that sometimes. We can argue about how many people, but anybody who does this regularly gets those testimonials, goes, like of course, people will, people will say all the time, yeah, I started to get brought around to some of this stuff. This played a role in it. That's definitely a thing that happens. Doesn't mean, of course, that debates are the main component of any political strategy. But then again, media in general isn't the main component of any political strategy, right? Whether you're just writing articles and doing stuff for your own audience, or whether you're sort of crossing over into enemy territory and trying to talk to somebody else's audience. Appreciate that, El Shrigma. Did not want to watch on Charlie's video and get my view 11 out of 10 times. But whether you're doing one thing or one of the other of those things, ultimately what you're doing is you're talking about politics, which I think is necessary and important, but it might be necessary, but it's wildly insufficient for political strategy. And look, if I fell out of one side of a lifeboat and like a really good union organizer fell out the other, I would not blame you for saving them, right? That there's like, if you had to make exactly that calculation. But I do think that an effective movement needs diversity of people doing a diversity of different things. And especially in the era when traditional media has collapsed to a pretty wild extent, it's a pale shadow of its former self. And various forms of what used to be called independent media have exploded. And the effect of these two things put together, like given the way the technology works and everything else, is that increasingly we live in a world where people can curate their own media diet. That it's easier than ever before for people with all sorts of different views to just surround themselves with content that reflects their view of the world. which, is good in some ways. It means that the views I like can have have certain kinds of expression they never had before. But it also means that pretty much literally the only way that you can ever talk to anybody else's audience in media is by going over there, right? Unfortunately, Charlie Kirk fans are not going to read anything I say about him in Jacobin. That's not happening. Whereas they do see me if I go on a show to argue with him. And, basically I wanted to do two things, right? And I guess this will be the last thing and then, throw to you guys, then we can actually start the debate. But I wanted to do two things here. One of them I've already indicated, right? It was that I'm a philosophy nerd. He talks a lot about philosophy. He says some very goofy things about it. I wanted to do that a little bit, but of course that's a distant second place. The first place, the thing, the first hour is entirely about pretty much I spend literally 10 seconds at the beginning, kind of explaining G.A. Cohen's socialist equality of opportunity argument. I don't use the proper names or anything, but what I'm saying is basically what he says, and then kind of pivot very quickly to, hey, your vision of what a qualitatively better society is might be very different from mine. I expect it is, right? But I know it is. But you say you're a populist, right? You make a big deal as populist branding. You use the word corporate as an insult, which is wild to hear coming out of the mouth of a Reaganite like Charlie Kirk. So, dude, you say you're a populist now. You say you're not a kind of corporate Republican. So why is it that you don't support anything that would increase the paychecks, increase the life expectancy, increase the autonomy, or increase the bargaining power of working people? And that's really the message that I want his audience to hear, because obviously, the hardcore fans, you're not going to reach them. That's not the point, right? I have no illusions whatsoever that hardcore Charlie Kirk fans who come in cheering for him are going to be moved one iota by anything that I say here. But that's never the point of a debate. The point is, what about people who maybe are sympathetic or somewhat sympathetic to Charlie? They're clearly listening to him or watching him, but they're not married to his view of the world necessarily. They're just listening. What about people who maybe even used to be hardcore fans, but for whatever reason, right now you're catching them at a point in their life when they're open to criticisms, when they're open to something else? And those are the people who try to reach. And that's what I'm trying to do, right? I mean, that's why I think I'm pretty forceful about the arguments, but I'm going to be extremely polite, right? Because I don't want to give them any excuse whatsoever to dismiss this. Oh, here's another triggered leftist. I want to put uncomfortable thoughts in their heads about the contradiction between what Charlie Kirk and Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson and the rest of these people say that they are and what they actually are.
Well, I think we're about a minute away from airing it. I just want to say it's an interesting thought. If me, a union organizer, and you, philosophy professor and YouTuber, if we were sharing a raft, people could decide who to save. I think maybe I'll ingratiate myself to the audience enough that someone might save me. But yeah, I mean, I think the question is, right, whether we want to try to persuade, you don't have to be a union organizer. You could have just done some canvassing for Bernie, and that if you knock on a door and you find a Trump fan, if you scream at them about how racist and sexist they are, even if that's true, you're probably not going to get as far as if you listen to them for a while. Not that you have to listen to Charlie, right? But the equivalent is of being polite, even if what they're saying is angering you. So it's a question of whether you want to just perform your values, or if you want to actually try to persuade, give them an argument, so to speak.
No, exactly. Oh, last thing before we cut to the actual video, let's watch the first half of the debate. People who watched me talking to Don Donana on the Jacobin Weekend already know this, but for anybody else, I won't spoil it. now, but it's something to watch out for. There is a reason. Now, I think for hardcore Charlie Kirk fans, this was like a hilarious cell phone that I said what I said about this. I expect and hope that other people's reactions to it will be different, but there is a reason why I'm wearing this U.S. Postal Service shirt. The Town Circle people who set up the debate actually sent this to me because of something that happened in the debate. So in any case, enough talk. Well, we're going to do nothing but talk, but enough live talk. Let's start the debate.
Hey everyone, I'm Steve Hayes and welcome to Town Circle. Today we have an extra special debate between Charlie Kirk and Ben Burgis, which we filmed at Turning Point USA studio as part of Charlie's new show, Debate Night with Charlie Kirk. But before we get started, I would like to thank everyone who pledged money to provide over 11,000 meals for those in need in order to make this debate happen. So without further ado, I give you Charlie and Ben.
Tonight's guest is a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, a philosophy professor at Georgia State University, Perimeter College, and an adjunct professor at Rutgers University. He's a columnist for the Jacobin magazine and has written 4 books, including his most recent, Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why He Still Matters. In addition to all of that, he hosts the podcast, Give Them an Argument, which you can find on his Patreon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ben Burgis to debate. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Debate Night. With us tonight is Ben, or Dr. Burgis, or Ben Burgis, however you want to say it. We're going to be debating, and we'll see where it leads us, Democrat socialism versus conservative populism. Super thrilled that Ben is here tonight to have this discussion. It'll start with some opening statements, and then we'll take it from there. The 2 minutes is yours, Dr. Burgis.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk, and thank you to Town Circle for setting this up. So I'm a democratic socialist because I don't think anybody deserves to have less power or a dramatically worse life because of factors that are outside of their control. So that's the first part. That's the philosophical basis. Concretely, I think it's obscene that we have an economic system where workers at Amazon warehouses skip bathroom breaks because they're worried about falling behind in their quotas, and their boss literally owns his own spaceship. Now, we can argue about what a fairer society would look like. I can contrast what I would see as utopia with what you would, and I'm always up for that kind of thing. I'm sure we'll get into some of it later. But what I really like to start out with is not so much that end point as the baby steps towards justice that we could take right now. Things like raising taxes on rich people to pay for social programs that would benefit the rest of us. Things like raising the minimum wage for the working poor. Things like making it easier for ordinary people to organize unions so they can have at least a little bit of a say at what happens in the workplaces where they spend half their waking lives. And I got to say, what always confuses me about you, Charlie, is that I see you say that you're not like an old style kind of corporate Republican in the Reagan, Bush, William F. Buckley kind of mold. And certainly the politicians you seem to be most enthusiastic about, people like Donald Trump or J.D. Vance now, make a big deal saying they're populist, they really want to help like struggling people in the heartland. And if that's true, I don't really get why you don't support any of those things that I just mentioned.
Well, very good. It's almost exactly 2 minutes. So I'll respond. First of all, thank you for being here. And if we want to spend an extended period of time bashing Jeff Bezos, I'm all for that. I think it's actually going to be really fun. So let me just first kind of tell you what I believe and why we believe it. It's kind of framed as conservative populism. Put simply, we believe in the natural law. We believe, as the Declaration of Independence says, the laws of nature and nature's God. We believe in limitations on human beings, and we should believe there are limitations on power, both government power and, yes, of course, corporate power, as Barry Goldwater said in the 1960s. We also believe America is strongest when families are flourishing, when there's a strong moral center, when middle-class work is respected and appreciated, And the populist component to this is we need to be aware of what's happening around us, see when core institutions are failing, like the family, which has been failing over the last 60 years in America, which can be attributed to many different things. I would attribute it to the rise of an aggressive social welfare state and an overindulgence in neoliberalism, that we must be willing to do something about it when the family starts to disintegrate, when our nation starts to fall apart, when our borders remain wide open. And so we pair those two things together, conservative populism, and the kind of philosophical basis for a lot of this is the willingness to act with prudence and wisdom to try and fix things that matter, things that objectively matter. And I've been really looking forward to this discussion. I hope it's more of a discussion than a debate, because we will disagree on plenty. But when you talk about a untouchable oligarchy, I completely agree. I think that there is an untouchable oligarchy in this country, both corporate and governmental, scientific and technological, that is crushing the everyday common man. Where I think we're going to disagree is that I think the end goal, the thing that we must strive to, is family formation, family protection, and that strong moral center. And conservative populism is a resurgence of focusing on these things and developing solutions to hopefully fix it.
All right. Well, I guess what I would say is when you talk about limited power, right? I get that. That makes sense to me. I think that absolutely, I think oftentimes actually people get the relationship between these things really wrong, and they'll think, well, the more you think that human nature is good and cooperative, the more, you might think that a fairer society is possible. And the more you think that human nature is flawed and selfish and cruel, then the more, you should think that, hey, we might as well just stick with free market capitalism. But I think the opposite is true. I think that the more you worry that given too much power over another, one person over another, that person is going to treat the other the way that Walmart treats its employees, the way that Harvey Weinstein treated aspiring actresses. The more you're worried about that, the more you should want power to be distributed as evenly as at all possible. And that's really why I'm a democratic socialist, that I think whether you're talking about Russia under Stalin or Amazon under our mutual friend Jeff Bezos,
not a friend,
then anytime you have one person having way too much power over another without democratic accountability, I think you're going to get really bad abuses.
So I think that's helpful. Where I think we'll disagree, though, is the means of which we can represent individual people against oppressors or people that have power. This is why I tend to defend markets. And I want to be very clear. Markets are a tool, something we set up to hopefully help human beings. There are externalities. There are jerks and dirtbags like Jeff Bezos that tend to con the system, not pay taxes, not treat their workers. And one of the reasons why this has become an emphasis, I think, of conservatives is we're willing to use prudence in a non-dogmatic way and say, wait a second, if we're trying to conserve something that is eternal and beautiful and true, is it a good thing that this kind of, let's just use Bezos again, $200 billion of net worth, while the average American family is struggling to pay off student loan debt or financial debt? Where I think we're going to explore, I can't do this in the remaining 20 seconds I have, though, is true decentralization must happen in a way that is consistent with both reining in the administrative state and reining in the technological and corporate power sources in our country. And the ultimate form of decentralization is the family. Strong families, strong households.
All right. So I guess when you talk about the family, sure, absolutely. If people, social institutions are making it harder to keep families together, that's a bad thing. I think that I would point to the financial pressures that that people are often under as a huge source of problems within families, as a huge reason for relationships and marriages failing. And that's something that I think would be helped by doing things like changing labor laws to make it easier to organize unions so people would be getting better wages and have more job stability, less of what employers like to call, flexibility and everybody else calls precarity. And so that might be one place to start exploring this is, maybe you'll surprise me here, right? But I do not think we disagree. We agree on that.
So, yeah, just am I good to respond?
Yeah,
okay,
go for
good.
it.
No, I just didn't want to take any of your time.
No, please.
So I want to get into the union argument. I want to get into the minimum wage argument. I want to get into the healthcare argument. And I'm glad for you to say, and I really want to zero in on this, that family formation is a good thing, because that is something that is debated amongst some Democrat socialist circles. And once we kind of get into the back and forth, I want to ask you about that, because certain activist organizations tend to disagree. Some activist organizations will call the family oppressive, patriarchal, where I believe the family is beautiful and the ultimate social bedrock institution. And every single statistic shows that when families are flourishing, divorce rates remain low, which they aren't currently, that crime goes down and literacy goes up and communities flourish. And I think one thing we can agree on, and you said it a little bit differently than I would, I think it's wrong when corporations are making families choose between spending another 10 hours at some soulless job or spending a weekend with your kids. I think the priority should be through our public policy, and our laws should always be toward the development of children and families getting stronger.
Well, I think that if you want to have a traditional family, absolutely, you should be able to do that. You talked about activist organizations. I think that I would point to, like, the Working Families Party in New York, for example, as an activist organization that clearly has no problem with families. Of course, if you want to live some other way, that's great, true. I think in a pluralistic society, I think everybody should be able to strive for their vision of the good life, and everybody should be free to live in the way that they want to be free. And I think that this is one of the biggest problems. When we talk about things like healthcare, oftentimes people on my side will emphasize the fact that life expectancy is higher in places like Canada, the UK, where they have socialized healthcare, and infant mortality. You want to talk about families, people's babies are less likely to die in places like Canada, the UK, than in the United States, and mortality amenable to healthcare, which is a stats nerd way of saying that you're less likely to die from treatable diseases, is lower in those places. And I think all those are true and important, but I don't think it's the most important thing, because most of us are not on the verge of dying most of the time. Most of us are not worried that our babies are going to die most of the time. The biggest way, I think, that not providing everybody with healthcare as a right affects the lives of most people is that it makes us less free, because people are a lot less likely to leave jobs that they hate if they're worried about, will I still have health insurance? Will my family still have health insurance? People stay in those jobs and don't pursue their dreams all the time because of that. There are people, I think people who are in good families and they want to keep them together, absolutely, they should be able to do that. But there are also people who stay in bad or even abusive marriages because they cannot afford to lose their spousal health insurance. And so I think that we're not only happier and we not only live longer, but I think we're also freer if we take care of those things.
So that's an interesting point. And what you're articulating, as before we get into the back and forth here, is what Lyndon Baines Johnson would call freedom from necessity, which is something I take exception with. I do not believe the state should play an interventionist role in saying that it is the role of government to say that you should be free from wants or necessity. I would argue that through a natural rights compact, that you should be free to pursue virtue. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't have a social safety net, which far too often becomes a hammock, not a social safety net. But I think the design of government and the state, which is really what we're debating here, right? What is the role of public policy, should be supporting things that are objectively good for people, for children, for the nation, and for the country. And so I'm happy to go into the kind of three categories that are common points of Democrat socialists next: healthcare, union membership, and kind of the development of unions, and minimum wage laws, because I would argue that some of your policy prescriptions do the opposite. They don't actually help working families. They actually raise prices and hurt job mobility. But I want to take a short break, and then we'll go back and forth, if that's okay.
Sure.
Everybody, we'll be right back.
Let's do it.
Welcome back, everybody. All right, no more rules. We can interrupt each other. It's totally voluntary, unlike socialism. I'm kidding. That's my first socialist joke tonight. So let me ask. So I want to ask you just kind of generally about Democrat socialism.
Sure, yeah, let's do it.
Where would you point to as 1, 2, or 3 examples that you think are the best embodiment of the worldview that you hold?
Yeah. So I think that that all of the things that I want, I do not think exist together right now in the world. But if you want to talk about places where a lot of the policy goals that I'd support, have been implemented, I certainly don't think they're fully socialist societies by any stretch of the imagination. But I think a lot of it has been implemented. I would talk about, the places you'd expect me to talk about, your Swedens, your Finlands, your Denmarks, your Norways. Now, these are complicated societies that, there are right-wing parties with elections sometimes too, and they do things that I don't like. But I think that these are places, broadly speaking, where a lot has been done to take certain things, like healthcare, for example, outside of the market so that people have that kind of freedom that I'm talking about, that they're not tied to jobs that they hate because they're worried that they and their families' basic needs aren't going to be taken care of if they don't stay in that subservient relationship. And you talked earlier about how you want the state to support things that are objectively good.
Yes.
It seems to me that living longer is objectively good.
Yes.
Having lower infant mortality is objectively good. And I would also say that having greater freedom to live your life how you want and not being tied to a particular job, I think that's also objective.
So job mobility is interesting. I want to get into that. So I'm not stunned you mentioned the Scandinavian countries.
Sure, yeah.
So Denmark doesn't have a minimum wage.
Well, but you got to do the other half of that. That they don't have a minimum wage, but they have vastly more favorable terrain for unions than the United States does, and so a lot of the wage floor is enforced that way. It's still not just they get whatever the market says they get.
But no government mandated minimum wage. What I find interesting, and there are some aspects of the Scandinavian countries appeal to me.
Sure.
According to the World Economic Freedom Index, every country outside of Norway is more economically free than the United States. And so is that something that would interest you? If economic freedom is the definition of your view, then I would change the Bernie Sanders shirt.
I think that what I mean by economic freedom and what they mean by economic freedom are going to be very different. I think oftentimes if you look at the methodology of those lists, it's very unclear. Like you'll get like the Cato Institute or whoever in some cases will do these lists where they rank places by freedom. And it's like, the things that they get points for, the things they don't get points for. Abortion doesn't matter. Whether you can have raw milk matters. I think are at least unclear to me. But I think this is the bigger philosophical thing,
sure,
though, right? Like let's just do this rather than getting into the nitty gritty about the lists. I think that what those guys mean by economic freedom is how much business owners are free to conduct their business however they want, without interference by the state. What I would mean by freedom in an economic context is the right of ordinary people to live the kinds of lives that they want to live and not be under the thumb to the extent that people are in the United States of whatever some corporation, wants to make them do.
Right. And so just to clarify this, though, about some of the Scandinavian countries, they went through massive deregulation in the 1980s. Right. Many of these Scandinavian countries did, including Denmark. Denmark has actually come out and has said, stop calling us socialist. We are not socialist. You've seen that quote.
Well, I have seen it, but I would like to say something about this. And people could check out. I actually wrote something about this last summer for Arc Digital Media.
I think I read it.
Okay, well, there you go. So
I know where you're going before you say it.
All right, well, beautiful. Fortunately,
but the audience doesn't know. So
happily, though, there are people who are watching who don't know. So let's say it anyway. So I think that saying that there's here is this center-right kind of prime minister who says, no, these social gains have nothing to do with socialism. And you say, oh, well, he says it, right? So therefore, he must be speaking for, Denmark as a whole, the Danish hive mind, I think is approximately equivalent to if the only two, if you were from Denmark and the only two Americans you'd ever talk to were Bernie Sanders and me, and you said, well, here's what they say about what America's all about. Here's what they say about, Social Security or the post office. This is the American point of view. I think, if you look at how long socialist parties were in power in Denmark and how many of those programs came about under them, I would not say that these are societies that have achieved socialism. We could certainly talk about what that would mean to me. But I would say that these are societies where socialist parties allied with strong unions have brought about really beneficial social reforms as an effort to move farther in that direction.
So let's talk about Norway,
sure,
a country that I'm familiar with, you're familiar with. Very wealthy country.
Yeah.
Why?
Because I think the biggest reason is that they have done something that I'm sure that you wouldn't support, which is nationalize their oil industry.
You mean use fossil fuels, not keep it in the ground like Bernie Sanders would be. Bernie Sanders has tweeted, we need to keep all fossil fuels in the ground, but Norway's built $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund after.
Okay, so would you support that?
Nationalization? No, but it's better than keeping it in the ground.
Okay,
sure.
I mean, look, I think ultimately we probably are better off, transitioning to other energy sources. But if we're going to use oil, I would much rather that oil be in the hands of the people, that it fund generous social programs like in Norway. And I often do kind of get a sense when conservatives say this, it's like, oh, well, there's really nothing socialist about it. They've just nationalized the oil industry and used the proceeds to fund all of these social programs. Well, I mean, if that's not socialist, can we at least have that not socialist thing? That sounds nice to me.
Let me clarify, is that if there is wealth to be redistributed, there must be wealth to be redistributed.
Sure.
And Norway has the advantage of having some of the most strategic oil reserves in the country. And I just pinpoint it in particular because there tends to be this anti-fossil fuel development movement.
I mean, it's something Norway and the United States have in common, is that we have a lot of oil. Now, if you want to, again, I know you've said you don't want to do this.
No, of course, I think the private ownership of minerals is a strategic advantage for the United States. But let me ask you about what I think is one of the reasons why I think the Scandinavian countries' pursuit of egalitarianism looks good on paper.
Okay, let's do it.
This is strict immigration. Now, this has changed in recent years because of a lot of the Syrian refugee crisis and more kind of left-wing governments taking over Sweden in particular. But Norway, for example, takes in about 70 immigrants a day, even with their more relaxed policies. America, much bigger country, albeit 2,740 legal immigrants, about 5,000 if you include the people going across the southern border. Do you, as being a Democrat socialist, do you support closed borders and strict immigration?
No, I don't, and I'll tell you why. So two reasons. One is that I think that, all of the economic data that I've seen says that having more immigrants actually increases the amount of wealth that society has to go around. And the second is I would ask what the alternatives are, right? So, we can do, like those families that, that you talk about, right? We can do things like separating families. We can do things like raiding, churches, to drag out immigrants. But I think we would really, really, really have to step up that, by a factor of 100 to actually get rid of all the undocumented immigrants in the country. Whereas I think a much better solution, if what you're worried about is, hey, here are people coming in who, they definitely, contribute to economic growth, but here are people coming in who are willing to work for low wages, whatever. I think a much better solution to that problem is for those people to have a pathway to citizenship so that they're not afraid to do things like join unions, or they're not afraid to do things like, take their employers to court when they violate labor laws. I think that's a much better solution to that problem than the sort of heavy-handed, police state kinds of tactics, which I think would be the only way that you're actually going to resolve the status quo in the other direction.
One of the things I like about Norway that you just said you don't like is to become a Norwegian citizen, you must speak the native language. It's a non-negotiable. You must have citizenship by birth is not applicable. And you must have lived in Norway for at least 8 out of the past 11 years. And so maybe you can help clarify this for me, because the mascot you're wearing on your shirt has changed on this, because I would understand the position you're espousing more if you said, hey, we're going to close off the borders. We're going to take care of our fellow countrymen. We are going to reject these globalist institutions, because Bernie Sanders used to say that. In 2013, Bernie Sanders said, it does not make sense to me to bring hundreds of thousands of those workers into this country to work for minimum wage and compete with American kids. Bernie Sanders said in 2007, 6 years prior, if poverty is increasing and if wages are going down, I don't know why we need millions of people to be coming into this country as guest workers. What changed?
Well, I think that the main thing that changed is that the context of both of those quotes that you just read was not about whether there should be a pathway to citizenship. It was about exactly the opposite. It was about the Bush administration's interest in 2007 and then later revivals of it in 2013, attempts to create a guest worker program, which I think he rightly compared to legalized slavery. A lot of immigrant rights groups were actually against those proposals for the same reasons, because those are things that instead of giving people the rights of Americans so that they aren't afraid to do things like organize unions, those are things that would essentially just legalize the status quo. This is a second tier of workers who are not going to have those citizenship rights, who it's much easier to, it's easy, who you can kick out of the country if their employer decides they don't like them anymore. And I think that that is a completely different thing. I think it could also, so I think in that case, I think there's less of a contradiction there than you think. But hey, look, Bernie Sanders isn't on my shirt because I think that the man is infallible. I could rattle off a list of things that he's gotten wrong over the years, but the reason he is that I think he's been the most important champion of doing things like raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, like giving everybody health care, ending the wars, etc., that would actually really materially benefit the majority of the population. And I guess I really struggle when I hear, conservatives being interested in the welfare of the working class suddenly when it's this issue of competition from low-wage workers, which is a question of pitting some workers over other workers. But when it's a question of doing things that would benefit workers in general, like raising the minimum wage, like giving everybody health care, then suddenly it seems to be a different story. Suddenly it seems to be that this is too interventionist. This is too administrative state. I mean, kicking immigrants out seems like a big expansion of state power to me too.
I want a small yet strong government. Strong in what it does, and foreign citizens, not foreign citizens, sure, or illegals in the country should be deported, should be taken out. And I think there's a cultural aspect to it. It's deep down you agree with, and that's what Norway gets right. They realize if you don't speak the language, you don't have a shared culture, then there's something that all of a sudden makes it less like a nation and more like a colony or more like a temporary place for corporations to make money. Let's talk about the minimum wage. Sure. So the reason why I don't want abrupt, quick, let's say increases the minimum wage, is it actually hurts workers. Washington Post, a very credible new study on Seattle's $15 minimum wage, says the following: workers have seen cut payrolls, they've been put off hiring, reducing hours, or letting their workers go. That is Seattle. Another study from Target, just because Target raised their wages abruptly in 2019, shows that workers say their hours were cut, leaving them struggling. Another one.
Okay, so
I can go through them. I have a whole packet of them.
Let's pause and do the first.
Seattle, the same thing. I go through New York.
First couple first, because in Seattle there have been a bunch of different studies, including one from UC Berkeley. I know that have, I don't know which one was published by Jeff Bezos' newspaper that you're referring to there.
Trust me, I'm no fan of the Washington Post.
But there was another study from UC Berkeley saying that actually it had no effect on the employment rate in the restaurant industry, and it achieved its goals. I know if you look at the Congressional Budget Office, which oftentimes people with your position love to cite, they said that if you raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and by the way, I thought it was interesting that you said abrupt, because I'm interested in how, whether you'd be okay with it if you did it slowly.
I think moderately kept up with inflation, done prudently, especially as we're about to have a period of mass inflation. I think that coupled with a workers' tax cut and other pro-growth policies wouldn't be the worst thing for the economy. Okay. No. I think that's a moderate economic position.
But keeping up with inflation, right? Like you're still saying the purchasing power of low-wage workers should be what it is now. And I would say that if you want to run this argument that, well, it's actually going to hurt, that's actually going to hurt workers more than help them.
The studies show that it has.
I don't think the studies do show that.
Well, so here's what it says. So low-wage workers.
Here's why. I understand what you're saying, that the studies show, some of the studies show that minimum wage increases lead to increased unemployment. That's the big claim that's usually made. Sometimes people will also say that leads to a reduction in hours, but the big one is usually increased unemployment. And so I'd say two things about this. First of all, the effect of minimum wage increases on employment is like the most studied thing in empirical economics in the last several decades. And there are studies you can find that say yes. There are a lot of studies that you can find that say no. And a word I almost never hear from people who say that it's going to lead to unemployment increases is meta-study, right? In other words, if you look at a bunch of studies over time and see, like, since you can have, very small sample sizes and and making big conclusions from very small sample sizes is generally, and then like making a big deal about them in the press. That's how people end up believing that plants can think and coffee cures cancer, that they looked at like some study with some super small sample size. But when you do the meta study of a bunch of different studies, most of those show no. But let's say, for the sake of argument, yes. Let's say that it does lead to some unemployment increase.
Because you agree certain studies do show that.
Yes, certain studies do show that. I think most of them, and especially meta studies over time, say no, but sure, let's say yes. So if yes, would that mean that it was going to hurt workers more than help them? Well, we could look at like the Congressional Budget Office, what they said in 2019, which was that 2/3 confidence that you'd have a range of unemployment effects somewhere in between 0 and 3.7 million. And most likely, they said 1.3 billion people would lose their jobs. Now, that's bad. I don't want 1.3 billion people to lose their jobs.
That's a lot of jobs.
But they also said that 27 million people would keep the jobs that they have right now and be paid more and would have more purchasing power. And so we say, okay, we have 27 million people who are being lifted out of poverty by this. We have 1.3 billion people out of jobs. Now, even if there was nothing that you could do about that, I'd still say that treating this as a knockdown, well, this is going to help poor people, working poor people, more than it's hurt them, more than it's going to help them, I don't think makes sense. But also, I don't think we have to accept that those 1.3 billion people, if that's the true estimate, have to be permanently out of a job. We could have public works programs that could employ those 1.3 million people, give them dignified, unionized public sector jobs. And if you don't think that there's plenty of work for those 1.3 million people to do in terms of federal public works, trust me, I could give you a long list of things they could be doing.
Let me build out the study, and then I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
So low-wage workers on average now clock 9% fewer hours, earn $125 less each month. That's Seattle. There's another one, New York City businesses struggle to keep up after a minimum wage increase. Would you support eliminating the FICA contribution for workers? That's a 7% tax on wages before we even talked about raising the minimum wage.
Well, I'd like to talk about raising the minimum wage with no preconditions, but
why not the workers' tax cut? That's what I always don't understand, because we tax workers at 7%. 7% of our workers here lose their paycheck as half of their FICA contribution. I never hear that from workers' rights advocates. Why?
Well, I think that first of all, the first question you'd have to ask is what's the money that's going to be generated by that for those workers? Then the second question that you want to ask is what's going to be lost on the other end in terms of services if that's cut. And I think that paying people a higher minimum wage, having those 27 million people get a living wage.
I can give them a 7%. I can give them a 7% wage increase tomorrow.
And what?
It's called cutting the FICA tax.
Yeah.
Every working person deserves 7% of their wages that are currently being taken by them by the government. Why don't you instantaneously agree?
So what are you going to? Well, because I know what the other shoe is that's going to drop there. What are you going to cut to pay for that tax increase?
Okay, so there's plenty. I could name a whole litany of departments I think I would cut to try to pay for it. But let's pretend that it's paid for, like everything Washington D.C. says.
Yes,
if
you could cut workers' wages and not
wages.
The taxes on workers' wages. If you could cut that, and on the other end, there would be absolutely no loss in anything that's a beneficial thing that's going to make workers' lives better, then sure, why not? But I think I think you should still raise the minimum wage, because I think, again, having those 27 million people now having a living wage, having the ripple effects for lots of people who are already making more than minimum wage, that's going to increase their wages. And then 1.3 million people need new jobs. Trust me, we can take care of that.
So you're obviously no fan of President Trump or his administration. During his presidency, the bottom 10% of workers actually had an income grow faster than the top 10% of workers. And so what we saw was a real blue-collar boom in the prior administration.
I think
without having to abruptly raise the minimum wage. And the reason was, let me just finish, is an emphasis on entrepreneurship. This is an indicator that I don't hear talked about a lot, which is how many new businesses are being started. And when you raise the minimum wage, it's harder for the deli owner, the dry cleaner to enter into the market, because all of a sudden the labor pool is like, man, $15 an hour, I could barely pay to keep the lights on. So if we want new business, and you agree, entrepreneurship is a good thing, right?
I think it's good to have new businesses. I'd like more of them to be organized as worker cooperatives.
We're going to talk about unions in a second.
We could get into that.
I want to get deep into unions.
But I do just want to say on what you're claiming about the Trump economy, because I I think this is an important point, right? Why? So yes, sure. Why? What explains those numbers that you just mentioned? You'd say it's a new emphasis in entrepreneurship. I'd say it's two things.
I could go through other things
okay,
too,
but
including an energy renaissance.
But I think the primary things are two things. One, that quite a few states during that time period actually did raise their minimum wage, and I think that had a big effect on that. Two, sure, that employment increases give workers more bargaining power, which a lot of conservatives now object to. They say, oh, nobody wants to work. But employment increases give workers more bargaining power in the labor market, and that's a good thing. But that's not really this new emphasis on entrepreneurship that Trump was doing. If you look at all the employment figures, whether you're looking at the overall civilian employment rate in the United States or whether you're breaking it down, Black, white, Hispanic, whatever, all of those, you see the same trend, which is that in 2009, at the beginning of the Obama presidency, when the effects of the 2008 crash were really coming in, all of those were way up here. That it was like, you have like 10% unemployment. Over the course of the 8 years of Obama, it goes from 10% to 4.7% overall civilian, unemployment. And then sure, into the 4 years of Trump, or, like we'll give them a pass for the COVID part, but but like under those years of Trump, then you go from 4.7 to 3.5. So that is a continuation at an overall slower rate, but a continuation of what had happened before. And the reason I'm bringing that up is not that I'm a big Obama guy. I mean, look.
No, I know you're not.
As you know, I'm a Bernie Sanders would be a good start guy. But
and I want to get into that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think you are
cleverly
cloaking your radicalism in three issues that are agreed upon. We're gonna get to the root of that.
I don't think so. I think I front loaded the radicalism and said these would be baby steps in the right direction. And I'm very confused about how you could be a populist without supporting those baby steps.
We're all Hegelians now, I suppose. Let me ask you this question.
No. But I do want to finish the point because I think it's an important one, right? That it's not that I think Obama is great. It's that I think that if you're going to say the populist thing about Trump and Trump economics, even though this is a guy who appointed hardcore union busters to the National Labor Relations Board, this is a guy who tried to throw millions of people off of healthcare, in terms of going against the Medicaid expansion. This is a guy who tried to make it a lot harder to qualify for food aid for those families he talked about. That the big populist thing is that he oversaw economic growth and hence job growth. Well, hey, if that's enough to be a populist, Barack Obama was a better populist than he was, and Bill Clinton was a big populist because he oversaw lots of economic growth in the 1990s.
What I am saying, though, is that it's mischaracterized that the people that you say you care about, the lower workers, actually did really well under those 4 years. I think Trump could have been more conservative, more populist in certain things. And just to clarify on the food stamp issue, millions of people got off of food stamps under Trump voluntarily because their wages went up. But I don't want to get too bogged. I really don't want to get too bogged down on the Trump presidency.
You had that extra 1% and change of unemployment going down, which is a continuation of previous trends. But
So let me kind of ask you more broadly. I guess we could go into some of these other aspects.
I have a question I'd love to ask you in a minute, by the way, but go for it.
Yeah, you're free to do that too, by the way. Do you trust the government?
Do I trust the government? Do I trust the government to tell me the truth, to do things that no, the government, by and large, that I think that those millionaires and billionaires, the guy in the shirt likes to talk about, exert vastly too much influence. But here's where I think people often go wrong from that true premise that the government is untrustworthy. I think premise is fine, but the conclusion, therefore, we should have less government in the sense of we should have less expansive social services. We shouldn't give everybody health care. I think that that's a fundamental confusion because I think that there's a difference between talking about what the government can do to you. And there we're talking about police, ICE, the expansion of the national security state, and what the government has a legal obligation to do for you in terms of supporting what I would see as fundamental human rights like healthcare and education.
Let me tell you where I think there's a flaw in this, and I really want you to talk about this. You say healthcare and education. There must be bureaucrats to enforce these things. You need the administrative state. So then you get the CDC, you get the NIH, you get unregulated agencies that you, as being someone who focuses on democracy, focuses on the power of the people, where is the check and balance against the CDC, the NIH, HHS? For every government program, you need hundreds of thousands of desk workers, which is where the word bureaucrat comes from in French. So you say you don't trust the government, yet you support expanding the social services, which will then necessarily expand government. Why do you want to expand something you don't trust?
Well, first of all, congratulations on the French vocabulary. I like it. But
I have other words too. We could après nous les déluge, which means after me the flood. We could talk about all my favorite French terms if you'd like. We could do a whole thing. You write for the Jacobin magazine, for goodness sake, so we could exchange notes on Robespierre and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I've only read the Confessions once. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'd be happy to do all of that. Although, my French is like Duolingo. I can't do that much. But
I'm done. I promise.
But I would say that if you don't want bureaucrats to have more power, if that's the big objection.
No, that's part of the objection. It's an element of it.
Sure. So let's start with that element. So if you don't want bureaucrats to have more power, then the thing that you should really object to, right? Because you said earlier, you think we got to have some kind of social safety net. So we're agreeing that there are some social services programs. We're arguing about how expansive they should be and how they should work. So
generous versus limited.
Sure. Okay. But this is the thing. If you want those bureaucrats to have less power, you don't want limited. That's the last thing that you want. You want generous. And here's why. You're gonna have to convince me on this one. I know. Like I really liked what you just did there. That was some good.
So to restrain their power, you must give them a lot of power.
No, you're not giving them any power. You're taking away their power. It's a really simple argument. Here's how it goes. That means-tested programs give power to bureaucrats. When you say you have to jump through all these hoops to qualify for something, and there's some bureaucrat who gets to decide whether you get it or not,
here's why
bureaucrats have more power. Whereas when you say this is a legal right that every single person has as a citizen, no Canadian is having a bureaucrat decide whether they qualify for healthcare. Or in Finland, you talked about all of the policies that, in Norway that you thought would be an issue for me. Finland
is the poorest
where they have
country.
Okay, I don't think it's because of this, but in Finland where they don't even have private schools, and certainly you have a right to higher education as a citizen, the way that you have historically in lots of countries, and I think it's worked very well. But when you have that, you don't have students jumping through financial aid, bureaucracy, hurdles, and does this person qualify to get school? Does that person qualify to school? Where bureaucrats have the power to decide what's up, because that's the case where bureaucrats have power over you. If everybody gets something as a right of citizenship, bureaucrats have no power in that circumstance.
But let me ask you something though. So you want Medicare for all.
Yeah.
Yet HHS is the largest civilian branch of our government. So as we have expanded Medicare, as we have expanded Medicaid, it hasn't been means tested as you want. We have hundreds of thousands of desk workers that are doing the means testing. Are you qualified? Yeah. Medicare reimbursements. And so even under your example, Medicaid, it's woefully idealistic. The point is
Medicaid is a means
tested. You cannot have a generous social program without a massive bureaucratic and, dare I say, corrupt administrative state.
Well, I think
Woodrow Wilson would even say that.
Well,
he says, you need the administrative state.
You think I like Woodrow Wilson, the guy who
probably he was a college professor, and a college president. So he's kind of in your world.
Well, okay. Trust me, neither of those things earn any points for me. But but I think that
that's fair.
But I mean, Woodrow Wilson is the guy who resegregated the federal bureaucracy after it was integrated. He put Eugene G.V. Debs in jail. Nobody on the left is going to see Woodrow Wilson as a hero. Liberals. Nobody on the left. But I was just going to say,
I know plenty of people that would, but that's fine.
I don't think you're going to find a lot of socialists.
FDR, LBJ, John Dewey, all these people believed in a strong administrative
state.
I
mean, you're rattling off a bunch of liberals, but that's okay. We don't need to argue about the historical figures. Let's just say this. If you're talking about administrative state, bureaucracy, well, your example is Medicaid, which is a means-tested program. And even at that, even despite the means testing, which is the part that gives the bureaucrats their power, which is also the part I'm objecting to, even despite that, we're talking about bureaucracies. As I think you mentioned earlier, the government has no monopoly on bureaucracies, plenty of bureaucracies in the private sector. And if you want to know which programs have the smallest overhead, right? even Medicaid, even despite the means testing, Medicaid, Medicare, all of those have much smaller administrative overhead than any of the private insurance companies, because the private insurance companies, one, they have to plan out their strategy for competing with each other, and two, the private insurance companies have a vast bureaucracy that is dedicated to finding ways to deny people's claims, because they've always got one eye on the bottom line for shareholders. And one question I'm very curious about, by the way, is that they you object for all of these reasons. You think it's too interventionist. You think it's too much administrative state to just providing everybody with health care.
These are all elements of the critique.
Providing people with health care as a human right, so that you can have, like, what people I know in the UK always tell me, which is, hey, when whatever, my mom got cancer, when whatever the situation is, people will say, the only person I ever talked about this was with a doctor, which is very different from Americans' experience with healthcare. If you can object to that on the grounds that that's too much big government, I am really curious whether you'd say the same thing for fire services. Like, would you be okay with it if we didn't have public fire services?
Absolutely not. As I said, small but strong.
Okay.
The government exists, as it says in the preamble of the Constitution, amongst many other things, to secure the blessings of liberty, to ensure domestic tranquility. And Hamilton said it best, that you need a nimble yet effective federal government, good at what it does, but not overreaching. And that's the whole idea of conservative populism, is within this constitutional republic framework. I'm a big fan of firefighters, police officers. I'm a big fan of Border Patrol. I'm a big fan of all these sort of things. But when all of a sudden I believe you get outside of the constitutional limits, is where you birth this fourth branch of government. And our mutual hatred of Woodrow Wilson is a perfect example of this, because he really believed the state, this is a Hegelian idea, will usher in that utopia, that the state is God, that through the mechanisms of the state, we will be able to turn the chapter and with it remake man. He wasn't the only person that believed that. FDR did, Lyndon Baines Johnson did as well, where we as conservatives and conservative populists say, hold on a second, that is not what the state is there to do for. Let me just say one last thing, which is that the state is there to preserve the natural law with prudence and wisdom, to hopefully develop families and foster children, not to try to remake human beings. When it comes to healthcare, not only do I have a moral complaint that it's not the role of government, it's also not good at doing it, and it also hurts the everyday common man. I
don't think either of those things are true.
But I have a moral argument, and I also have a utilitarian argument. I just want to make sure that's clear.
Let's start with the moral argument, because I am very unclear on this. Because why is it that having public firefighters or public police is not overreach, but having public health care is? Why would it be objectionable if, instead of having public fire services that everybody gets to use, you had everybody just having to have private fire insurance? And if you had a better private fire insurance plan, they'd probably put out your fire faster. Or maybe we had public fire insurance, but only for people, the poorest people or the oldest people, which would be the exact equivalent for healthcare. Or the same thing for policing, the equivalent, for like security insurance, because all of these things seem very similar to me, because having your house burned down, being victimized by a crime, or needing chemotherapy, those are all cases where your life and limb is in danger. Like, these seem pretty parallel to me. What do you see as the big disanalogy?
So the first problem, it's mostly local, police and fire, so therefore it's more accountable.
Okay.
So the dollars don't go to some sort of albatross to the kingdom of Washington, D.C. of unelected, unknown, kind of just unchecked bureaucrats. That's number one. Number two, we do have a system in the country, despite what you're saying, where if you need health care, you will be taken care of. Is it broken? Is it inadequate? I just
said, though, right?
Well, hold on a second. I'm saying it is illegal to deny someone service of care. Illegal. Now, do we have problems with our healthcare system? Do you think if you could put me in a room and I could strike a huge bargain with you, I think that there are elements of the German system that are admirable. I will say that, where you have a public system and a private system. Where I start to all of a sudden say, time out, no go, no fly zone, is where I hear people like Bernie Sanders, and I'm paraphrasing, who want to get rid of private insurance as we know it. That's a big mistake. Healthcare, here's how I think the biggest problem with healthcare is. It's not individualized. It's way too bureaucratic, way too top down. And yes, we have pharmaceutical companies that are addicting people to drugs that they should not be addicted to. We have a sick care problem in our country. And I agree with a lot of people on the left with this. Maybe we'll agree that we have an obesity problem. We have a problem of how we get our food. We have a corporate farming problem. I agree with all those things. Do I think that a government-run system of healthcare that will be more similar to how the IRS or how the Postal Service works, that's somehow going to be the solution to that? Absolutely not.
Well,
But
I
if
mean,
you put me in a room,
the Postal Service is amazing, and I do
Whoa.
not think
can you say that again?
the Postal Service is amazing. It has been an engine of upward mobility. It has been
All right,
an engine
that's,
of racial equality. If you building the black middle class, massively an engine of that.
Have you ever used the Postal Service?
I have, and the Postal Service will carry a letter from here to Alaska
So will FedEx.
for no, not for the same price, and they're certainly not going to serve.
You know it's going to get there.
No, I do not know that, and it's certainly not going to do it. It's never going to get there with as much service to out of the way rural areas.
I got to give you credit.
Anything.
I've never heard anyone defend the post office.
Like it's cheap. Well, you need to talk to more people because like the post office is an amazing institution, and it should be massively expanded. In fact, one of the best things I think they have in some of those Scandinavian countries is postal banking, which if we did that, Bernie Sanders' proposal would immediately put out of business all the payday loan vampires that prey on unbanked people, would create millions of new good unionized jobs. Postal Service is great, but I do want to go back because I don't want this.
I got to.
I don't want this to get lost.
The post office lost hundreds of thousands of packages and was 6 months late. That's where you want to run our healthcare system?
I think that. Well, first of all, I think that if you actually have a fairer look at the numbers, I think the Postal Service does do a really good job. I think that oftentimes when people say no, they are not using the same metrics to evaluate it they'd use to evaluate everything else. But if you want to know something that would be very much like what Medicare for All would be like if we had it in the United States, then I'd say looking at delivery of packages is probably not what you want to do. What you probably want to look at is countries like Canada, where they already have Medicare for All, Great Britain, where they've gone further, and the hospitals are publicly owned.
That's all the. Let's talk about that.
Well, okay, but those are places.
That's a different
where,
thing.
Where people live longer, where fewer of their babies die, where the rate of mortality amenable to healthcare is way better. Or look, you said you want it to be local. That you don't like the fact
super localized.
Sure, local, great. So if all the hospitals were municipally owned, you'd be cool with that?
All the hospitals, it would be, well, first of all, that's actually the case in a lot of places. There's a lot of county-run hospitals all across the country.
I'm not denying they're county-run. Okay, so you would be okay with that. So it really has nothing to do with centralization.
Well, no, it does. Trust me. The city of Chicago can be equally, if not more corrupt than the Kingdom of Washington, D.C.
Is it going to be more corrupt than the private insurance companies?
I mean, that's a good question.
Okay,
let me ask you a question.
But you did also say, right, and I really want to make sure
that local is generally better, but I'm not going to die on the Cook County is a great county hill.
Well, this does go back to what you said earlier, though, when I asked you about fire protection, because you said, well, the difference is that nobody could be turned down from the hospital.
That is a law.
Yes, that is a law. I'm glad that it's a law.
I am too.
Okay, good, wonderful. We agree on that. That is a good government intervention to stop the private sector from doing what it would otherwise do and did otherwise do before that law was passed. But also, I would say, do the equivalent for the fire services. That the only people who get it without having to pay at the point of service are the poorest people, are the oldest people. Everybody else has to rely on private fire insurance, which varies wildly in quality. And if you don't have private fire insurance and you're not poor enough to qualify for the means-tested, bureaucrat-enabling system for poor people, and you're not old enough for the other one, and you end up having to have the fire department come and save you anyway, then you have a giant bill that's going to bankrupt you. Do you think that sounds like a fair system?
No. So let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
So is that, here's where, how do you define healthcare? This is a very important question, right? Because healthcare could be, hey, I just got a gunshot wound I need to be taken care of. Absolutely. Or healthcare could be, I'm 800 pounds overweight. I'm eating terribly. I have no sort of interest to exercise or eat well. Why all of a sudden should that person be put into the same exact level of care of someone that has saved money and taken care of their health? Why should someone who's 800 pounds overweight be given in this sort of realm? Why should human agency and choice have zero emphasis at all?
What you're describing, the only difference between that and what already exists in the United States is that we would have to add, and they're rich enough that they can afford really high quality medical care. Right now, somebody who's 800 pounds, who doesn't watch their diet, who chain smokes, etc.
I agree. Yes,
but
you could add chain smoking.
But sure, all those things.
So you think that none of that should be given a preference?
Well, here's what I'm saying, that I think in the system that we have right now, somebody who checks every single one of those boxes, but is rich enough to afford the best medical care, skips in line ahead of the person who takes care of their health, exercises every day, doesn't smoke, eats well, but lost their job or just is cobbling together 4 part-time jobs like so many Americans are, and thus doesn't have employer health insurance.
It's an interesting question. So you believe just because you have better money, you shouldn't be able to have better stuff?
I believe,
or more money, better stuff.
I believe that when it comes to something like healthcare, no,
that's a very broad thing.
I do not believe that people should get life-saving services preferentially because of how much money they have. I think that. So
how much money they've saved? How about that? Someone saved their whole life, and they said, in case there's a disaster, I'm going to put $500 away a month. They get to age 45, and all of a sudden they realize that they have some sort of health complication. They shouldn't be able to take advantage of the money they've saved for their entire life.
Well, this actually goes back to the very first thing that I said, like the opening couple sentences.
What is justice?
That I said, because what I said is that I don't want some people to have dramatically worse lives than others because of factors outside of their control. Now,
what about things they can control, though?
Well, if we
saving
money, if we lived in a world where all economic inequality was due to thrift versus indolence or laziness versus industriousness, I would have much less objection to this stuff than I do in the world where we actually live, where somebody who saved up their whole lives, but then they have unexpected medical expenses that bankrupt them, which happens all the time. That they have is going to get worse health care than somebody who has never saved at all, but is somebody if Hunter Biden, right, had some massive medical bill tomorrow,
he would probably have. I mean, yeah, considering his lifestyle.
Sure, right. So if Hunter Biden had that huge medical bill tomorrow, then he would get in line ahead of people
for multiple reasons, both access to power and also money.
Sure.
So that's a good example.
Those are both bad things, but they have
largely unearned, and I agree.
Sure. So, and I would say the same thing about the Walton children. I would say the same thing about anybody who is inheriting money. When you go to the hospital, or you go to buy insurance, they don't ask you, did this money come from being thrifty and saving your whole life?
Let me ask you a question.
Or did this money come from stock ownership? Or did this money come from inheritance? They just ask, do you have the money to afford this?
And that's part of markets, right? Is that you're not able to make a moral claim for every dollar bill, but generally markets will go towards value and value creation. We're up against the hour break, and we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to resume, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So I got a lot more I want to go to, but I actually want to close this thought on one thing, because it goes to your other thing that
actually, could I mean, if you'll indulge me, could I ask you like a 30-second question?
Sure, because I really want to close that point.
I know we're coming up to it,
yes.
but I'm so fascinated by this, right? So we agreed earlier.
Is it the firefighter thing again?
It's not the firefighter.
Okay, good.
Okay. Although, I think there's more to discuss.
I'm very anti-fire.
They have that's good. You should be equally anti-cancer, and then just like we have fire departments, we should have Medicare.
That's why I think people who eat well and don't smoke and make good decisions should be rewarded for human agency.
Yeah, which is not at all what.
Because the inverse of your statement, I just want to make sure this is clear. The inverse is you say that people should not be penalized for factors outside of their control. The inverse is that I think people should be rewarded for factors inside of their control.
Yeah, and most of what we've got right now is not about.
No, I agree with that.
But
I want a system that rewards people for good choices.
Okay, so here's what I want to ask, real quick. Sure. I promise. So we established earlier how much we both liked Jeff Bezos.
Yes.
Dislike best Jeff Bezos.
Are you going to ask me, should I raise his taxes?
Well, because this is why I'm curious about it.
Because
I saw in 2019.
Yes, with Kyle Kalinske.
Yeah, and he asked you, would you be willing to raise Jeff Bezos' taxes by like 1% to provide housing for every single homeless veteran? And your response at that time was that you'd hope he'd do it voluntarily. And I think at this point we've established that's not going to happen. He'd prefer to buy a spaceship. So
that's probably true. Yeah. So if you put a gun to my head, would I raise his taxes? I mean, I guess if I was a representative, I guess yes.
That's good.
For other reasons.
This is progress. I'm so proud of you,
Let me
Charlie.
tell you. I said, I guess conditionally, if all of a sudden there would be a comparable piece of legislation alongside of it that would actually value and prioritize things I cared about. If it was just to raise his taxes to go into the current albatross pit of the administrative state, I'd rather have him buy spaceships than give money to Fauci.
But if it was earmarked for a housing for homeless veterans, and you would say yes.
The answer is yes, because I think Jeff Bezos, from a moral standpoint,
good progress.
But let me tell you why. Let me clarify why.
Sure.
Jeff Bezos games your favorite department, the Postal Service. He games the corporate tax loophole system. Yeah. Jeff Bezos has a total disregard for what I consider to be the American way of life. And he has this weird fascination of going into orbit. And guess what? I hope he stays there.
Okay. Well, I congratulate you on this progress.
Well, I mean, you could call it progress. You could also call it a commitment to prudence.
Okay,
but it's that Greek word prudentia, which is looking at things as they are, and it's a non-dogmatic way of governing yourself in the country, which is a perfect segue to the question I wanted to ask, because we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back here with Dr. Burgis. If we're agreeing too much, don't worry. We'll get back to the disagreement. I'd like to thank Professor Burgis for joining me tonight, as well as Town Circle, who partnered with Turning Point USA to bring you this conversation. I hope you all enjoyed the debate and encourage you to engage with those who do not share your views. If you'd like to learn more about Professor Burgis, check out his books and don't miss his podcast, Give Them an Argument. You can hear the rest of this debate on the Charlie Kirk Show podcast, as well as the Town Circle website. That's Town Circle with an S, towncircle.com, or check out charliekirk.com for the debate on our podcast feed. Debate night, we'll be back soon. God bless you guys.
All right, don't go anywhere. We've still got another hour of debate left. So this is the first half that was played on the Turning Points USA YouTube channel. We've still got a whole hour of the bonus half. I think the bonus half actually ended up lasted longer. But meanwhile, we have the other Dr. Burgis here, and
the other Dr. Professor. Yes. Mrs. Dr. Burgis.
Yep, that person. She's here. So we're going to start the second half of the debate in just a few minutes. But meanwhile, here we have here. Let's do it. There we go.
Getting me on my Postal Service shirt.
Yeah, so
it's
they
very
actually
meaningful to me.
Yeah, they actually sent us. Town Circle sent us.
This is all I get?
Well,
bruh.
They sent us a U.S. Postal Service shirt, and it made us laugh. We got another one, so we could both have one.
I love the post office.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the fact that in Charlie Kirk's world, it just like goes without saying that of course the Postal Service sucks, is awful. This thing that provides this ridiculous public service that they'll take things from like upstate New York to rural Alaska for 55 cents and in the process provide, vast numbers of good paying, stable union jobs over the decades. I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe I'm just a crazy commie that way, but that seems like something that serves multiple public goods to me.
Yes.
Yeah, I need one of those shirts. Damn, Ben, I've been, I scrubbed through, but that actually went even better than I was expecting. I'm trying to be unbiased, but like the one time when he would bring up something that I was like, I wouldn't have known what to say. Like I think also being prepared, not with your binder, but with the binder in your brain by watching all of those. I think it helped, right? Because he kind of brings up the same points. It seems like he didn't really surprise you, except for the concessions that he gave you, where he's like, "Yeah, let's tax Jeff Bezos and give the money to the low income."
Well, he kind of squirmed around on taxing Jeff Bezos. He sort of went back and forth about whether he'd do that or not. But by the end, he got there. So I was proud of him. That was good.
So to answer Mr. Professor Ryan Lech, I mean, it's close. It's close right now. We gotta wait and see. What was that I said to you after what was it, in the middle or after the?
Oh,
it was in the middle. It was at this point.
Yeah.
What was it that I came up and said to you?
So Professor Jennifer Burgis, as one of the like 3 people who didn't work for Turning Points USA who actually got to see this live, and who was,
It was the 2 Town Circle dudes and me.
And this was, this was the like Jen, is not a political obsessive like we are. So
sorry.
So she had not seen Charlie Kirk do his thing.
I had barely heard of Charlie Kirk. I might not have heard of Charlie Kirk before, without Ben bringing him up.
And so seeing him in person, was the first time she did. And so the first hour of the debate was over, and told a few people this was my favorite moment from the debate. It was not captured on camera. Jen, I'm still sitting on that chair waiting for the second half to start. And Jen walks up and she leans over and whispers in my ear, "Jesus, this guy is a fucking idiot." Which, that's her. That's not me saying it. I'm not saying it. I'm just like, I report, you decide.
Yeah, but then it was nice because they had me sit down on Ben's lap and they took a nice picture of us, which you can see on Twitter.
There you go. Yeah, I don't know. Andy, thoughts?
I gotta say, like all the hours of Michael Brooks showing you that Joe Rogan clip with Dave Rubin has finally paid off. So I'm surprised you didn't bring up chickens.
Yeah, Dave Rubin, while arguing with Joe Rogan, who, like, Joe Rogan doesn't really argue with people, like, typically. Like, he's not a, like, generally speaking, like, when he has people on, he's just kind of like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, all right. And that's kind of the vibe. He's a very chill guy. That's why people who like him find him likable.
Ben, I think you have a question there that you should be paying attention to.
Sorry. No comment.
Hey!
Must have tricked you somehow.
I appreciate it though.
But yeah, so this is a rare instance though, right? I mean, I get it, right? I maybe find Joe a little less likable now that he's like a vaccine conspiracy theorist, but I get it, right? He has a very likable vibe, and as part of that, he just he's very impressed with whatever his guest is saying. Usually, it's like, oh wow, okay, yeah, always seems a little stoned. But there was this time, and I promise, by the way, we're going to get back and do the second half of the debate in like.
Wait, do I get to have my champagne or what?
Yeah, let's do it.
To you.
I wish you told me I got to grab some whiskey for the post game.
All right. Well, you and I will have a shot of whiskey at the post.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in this particular,
this isn't bad.
Yeah,
you didn't get the cheap stuff for this.
It's still pretty cheap, maybe not quite as cheap as usual.
As our anniversary.
But there's a point where he asks Dave Rubin why he's a libertarian, and Dave says, "Well, I mean, come on, what does the government do right? They don't do anything right." And Joe, and this is the aspect of Joe Rogan I love the most, when he does the like everyman sort of like ask intuitive questions thing. It's like, I don't know, dude. I think they do the post office pretty good. And Rubin says, no. It's like the post office, we don't need that. The post office could cease to exist, and Amazon and UPS and drones. And Michael used to have this as a sound drop on TMBS. Dave saying competition would kick in. And Joe just does a remarkably good job of explaining why that doesn't make sense. And then they kind of move on and they start talking about exactly. Competition is not kicking in. Why that doesn't really make sense. Why it would not really be the case that any of these people would have an economic incentive to carry a letter, from, again, like upstate New York to rural Alaska, some super out of the way place for 55 cents, that's not a thing they would do.
And we complain every time the price of stamps goes up. It used to be a dime back in my day.
Right. Yeah, it's all the way up to 55 cents. Let's see what the completely privatized postal service would look like. And then,
You can see that Ryan thinks that I have good taste in guys. That's because Ryan's one of my favorite people. So, of course, he thinks I have good taste.
There you go. The even better part of that was when they would start talking about regulations and building codes. And Dave said, well, you wouldn't, that's like Dave was actually bringing up building codes as an example of unnecessary burdensome regulation. And he was like, all these, you can't have a wire running here. This has to be a certain number of feet apart. And there was, Joe was like, I don't know, dude. I mean, I think a lot of people would die if they didn't have that. And basically Dave took the position that just Yelp reviews would be enough to stop unscrupulous building contractors from having unsafe building sites and killing people.
That's how I understand it. Yeah. That the Yelp review is everything. Yelp review and rate my professor. That's where we go.
Yeah. There we go. It sounds like an awesome society. I want to live in it. All right. So what can we say about the first half before we go to the second? I see people keep saying basically the same thing, and they're all right. Well, I don't know. I mean, he showed off his French, so.
That's right. He did.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah, I'm sitting next to a professor, so uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, seis. I could go on. Yo también. I could go on.
For Jean out there. Bear icky uch dirt ray.
I can do this all day. You want to talk about Rousseau? You want to talk about Woodrow Wilson? I could name.
Lyndon Baines Johnson,
Yeah.
not the other one.
Right. If you just say Lyndon B. Johnson, people might not be sure which Lyndon Johnson you're talking about. There are probably several. So Lyndon Baines Johnson. Yeah. All right. This is the meanest thing I'll say, and then we'll go back to Lyndon Baines speak for itself.
Is it though?
I think the reason he kept saying Lyndon Baines is that's probably what sent his binder.
And no, they took the chili pepper off of Rate My Professor. Sadly.
He has the Trumpian.
Somebody did say that I was pretty funny and weird in a good way.
There you go.
So that's my favorite rate ever.
I was just saying he has the Trumpian quality of when Trump was reading the teleprompter of just kind of saying emphasizing random words, you know what I mean? Just to amuse himself. He's clearly bored, so he's like Lyndon Baines Johnson. He was getting bored, I think. Until it came to it seemed like until it came to something he actually had talking points about or cared about, he kind of just let you. I think that's why a lot of the comments on his channel are Ben talked too much because it's his show. Clearly, he shouldn't let you railroad him like that.
Yeah, it seems like if he wanted to say things he wasn't saying on his show where he controls everything, that
he did say there were no rules.
Yeah,
so.
He did say that, but I also think if people's big complaint is my guy didn't talk enough, that probably doesn't say good things about how their guy did.
Although I don't know if anybody can stop you from talking is the thing.
I'm sure they could have cut the mic or something.
That's definitely like a chili pepper. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Will wreck you.
So I guess the one thing I would emphasize before we go to the second half is just okay, the alleged topic was democratic socialism versus, yes, the meanest stuff is in the, I'm not sure we'll have time for one today. We'll see how everybody's feeling. We get to the end of it, but for the post games generally for patrons, so sub if you want the meanness, but I think that like the alleged topic was democratic socialism, or if you're Charlie Kirk, Democrat socialism. I guess he really objects, for some reason, right-wingers all really object to the ick in democratic, but Democrat socialism versus Trumpian populism was the original thing, or he sort of changed it to conservative populism. I don't know if he's pivoting away from his guy. That would be sad. But like that was the alleged topic, right? That he's supposed to be a populist. So he identified some things he doesn't like about society that are like populist complaints, but I didn't actually hear what policies he would support to do anything about it. Like, how is it? Okay, he doesn't like that people, you know, when people have to come in and work weekends, they can't spend time with their family. Okay. I mean, I know what I'd do about that, right? Make it easier to organize a union so, you know, you can have some say and, you know, like overtime rules and all that stuff. Clearly he doesn't support that. What does he want? I don't know. Like it seemed like what he really wanted to talk about was how awesome families are.
You know, that's fair.
Sure.
Fair.
I mean, I like my family, but
yeah, I like my family. I like our family. Big on family.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I even like my in-laws, absolutely. But but I've got, you know, but like I don't really see a lot of socialists running around saying they hate families. I don't think that's particularly point of contention. And again, I want to know, what does he want to do to help families? Like what's his solution? What's the Charlie Kirk plan for making things better for families? And I didn't hear that anywhere.
Yeah.
What plan? What did he have for you know, anything?
Yeah, this is deafening silence on my end because I honestly couldn't tell you what he wants. He just kept talking. Yeah, he kept talking about being prudent, right? And he talked a lot about making references to sound smart. And then he tried to critique your positive programs, right? Like minimum wage is going to hurt, all these things, right? But it seems like there was a fatalism, right? Which is that these are all big problems, but I don't really have any solution other than family. And he didn't even really get into the like that kind of faith and pure market capitalism. He didn't even get into it that much in this, but that's really all I've heard him propose.
Yeah, I mean, right. So he was against all of this, you know, social democratic stuff, against higher minimum wage, against making it easier to organize a union, against giving everybody health care. That was all clear. And the only thing that I heard for him that was a positive vision was, I'm paraphrasing, but I don't think unfairly, that we need to kick all the Mexicans out. I mean, like that seemed to be what he was saying. I mean, maybe that's an unfair gloss on, you know, whatever he means by close the border that's not already happening, right? You know, that like it's not like right now, you know, we don't have a border patrol and ICE and lots of people are deported and all that stuff's happening right now. In some way or another that he didn't quite spell out, he must want to dramatically escalate that because he thinks that, you know, the borders, you know, people are just streaming in, whatever. But like, other than that, I don't know. I don't know what the positive plan is. That seems like a pretty, you know, I would just think if you want to say Trumpian populism, conservative populism versus democratic socialism. Okay, we heard a lot about what the democratic socialist solutions to these things were. I don't know what the conservative populist solutions are to these things and how they might be different from just standard shit that Republicans have been saying, you know, for the last, you know, 50 years, you know, like if so, he hasn't told us, but who knows? Maybe he'll tell us in the second half. So we are probably in the
maybe.
Yeah. And even if not, he says some fascinating things about Marx and Hegel. He says a really fascinating thing about Plato. So lots of good stuff coming up. Let's give it a watch.
Welcome back, everybody. Dr. Burgis. We were talking about many things. I hope you're having fun.
Oh yeah,
good. I want to ask you a question. I will get back to the other question I want to ask you and I want to get more into philosophy here. What's your view of Karl Marx?
My view of Karl Marx is pretty positive. I think that you can certainly find things like anybody who's writing in the mid-19th century that, you know, if there's nothing that you think is wrong about 150 years later, then like something has gone very wrong, right? You know, there should be ways that you can say, no, this part no longer makes sense. You got to rethink that. I think you have to look at it a la carte, but I think that Karl Marx is a basically positive figure. I think that the theory of history is mostly right, and I also, so yeah, I see you smiling. Happy to get into it.
I'm happy to debate the Hegelian
well,
dialectic and the phenomenology of spirit.
Oh, okay.
No, not debated. We can discuss it.
Not where I thought this was going, but that's cool. But
I mean that's basically what you mean by the theory
well,
of history,
I don't think it is. I think there's a big difference there.
He was the head of the young Hegelians.
Well, he started out as a Hegelian, and then he rejected it in favor of what in some ways structurally is similar, but in some ways is the opposite because it's based on materialism. But here's what I do think when we talk about Marx, because I think that there's an interesting thing that happens here, that when people talk about Marx, they tend to say, well, any like dictator who existed in the 20th century, who claimed to be inspired by Marx, people who were born decades after he died, that discredits everything that Marx said. But then when we're talking about a philosopher like John Locke, who a lot of
love John Locke.
Yeah, right. And then, but then like John Locke, the man both philosophically justified and was personally involved in the slave trade, given his role, formulating the Constitution of South Carolina colony. The man philosophically justified the genocidal dispossession of Native Americans.
That's a misinterpretation.
Well, I think so, right? Because like his view is they don't really have property rights because they're not using the land properly, and so they haven't mixed their labor with it in the right way to establish a right to it. Whereas not only did Marx never not praise any dictatorships that were alive, when he was alive, his model for what he thought transition to socialism would look like was the Paris Commune, which was ultra democratic. And the only head of state anywhere in the world who he liked enough to send a friendly telegram to was the democratically elected Abraham Lincoln, who he liked for anti-slavery reasons.
So there's a lot of things I want to get into. So with the Paris Commune,
yeah, sure.
Are your favorable view of that? You do write for the Jacobin magazine, so I imagine. Do you think that? I guess this is a question about human nature.
Sure.
Do you take a Rousseauian view of human nature? Do you think man is born free and remains the rest of his life in chains, or do you believe in tabula rasa, like blank slate, or what is your view of human nature?
Okay, sure.
Because I think that's actually instructive for how we proceed.
So we covered this a little bit earlier, but I'm happy to go back into it. So I think that as far as human nature goes. Are people fundamentally kind and decent and cooperative? Are people fundamentally selfish and cruel? I think that to fully answer that, you need to get really deep into evolutionary psychology and a lot of other things. And the answer is incredibly murky. I think the only really honest thing you can say about it is what David Hume says in his essay on the afterlife, when he says that it would be really hard to sort out who deserves to go to heaven and who goes to hell, because most of us float somewhere between vice and virtue. But what I think is that almost everybody gets the relationship between the human nature issue and the capitalism and socialism issue exactly wrong.
So tell me why.
That because
you touched on this earlier.
Yeah, I did touch on this earlier.
Okay, because if you have a Hobbesian view of human nature, you think that you should actually want big government.
I'm happy to get into it. So I think that
which is what Hobbes believes. I guess
I certainly don't want big government in Hobbes' sense. This gets back to
the Leviathan.
This gets back to the distinction between the things that government could do to you, like break up families and deport people, and the things that government is under a legal obligation
stop you there.
To do for you.
You really think that government has the ability to restrain itself from saying, this is what I can do, what we could do for you? You think government can have this dividing line between benevolence and malevolence?
You don't think the government could restrain itself? I thought you were all about limited government.
Well, constitutionally, absolutely.
Okay, so you think the government
only if could
obey restraints about what it's supposed to do?
Only with the fierce limits of courts and not even establishing those departments in the first place. That the best way to limit government is to not create those departments or those means to do it.
Well, I think
have a spy agency domestically, for example. It's like, we're only going to spy on a couple people.
Well, okay. So I think that might be the first thing.
What I'm saying is once you introduce that power, it will be abused.
Other than your hatred of Jeff Bezos and Hunter Biden, I think the first thing we've agreed on tonight is that we shouldn't have domestic spy agencies.
I totally agree.
I think, but I think that
including the Postal Service, which spies on our citizens.
I think that I don't think that's the primary effect of the Postal Service. I don't think that's
because
right.
They're too busy losing my mail
of the Postal Service. I think that the Postal Service, given how cheaply
You
it
don't have to
services,
keep defending the
how
Postal
many,
Service.
how many,
I'm
how
starting to
many
feel sorry for you,
things-
man. You don't have to do
I,
this.
I think. Well, I don't think you should attack the Postal Service. I think that it's been a tremendous economic benefit to many millions of
All right,
Americans.
okay. We
But
don't have
they
to
have a-
stay
but-
bogged down
but,
on it.
But I do think, but on the philosophical
Yes,
question,
that's
because that's
fine.
where you want to go. I think that the more you're worried that one person given too much power over another is going to treat that other like a little kid might treat a fly trapped in a jar, the more what you should want in both politics and the economy is to have power be spread as evenly as possible. So earlier, and I want to make sure I'm addressing this because
Yes.
I wouldn't want anybody to think I was avoiding the subject. Earlier, you were saying that I was like hiding my radicalism by talking about the things that we could do immediately, which is, I've got to say, a little bit funny because I do spend a lot of time writing about the more radical long-term
Like
stuff.
banning private beaches and letting in the entire country of Afghanistan.
Yeah, I think that well, first of all, I don't think the entire country of Afghanistan wants to come. I think a lot of the entire country of Afghanistan,
I was being
unfortunately,
facetious. Finish this
celebrates
thought,
the
yes.
supports.
But you actually do write about it.
Supports the Taliban. I think refugees fleeing from the crisis that we created absolutely should come in. But yeah, I do write all the time about the radical stuff. Those things are not uncontroversial. I don't think I'm afraid to talk about it. But I think that when you talk about the really radical long-term goals, you say a lot of times you like to just talk about the value of markets, and I do agree. Markets are good at some things.
Good, we agree on that.
Yeah, they have I think that if what you're concerned with is coordinating production of consumer goods with what people want, I think markets are good at that. I think that there's a difference between markets in consumer goods and the labor market, and I think the difference is that the labor market, people's need for a job and people's need to keep the job they have is vastly less elastic than their need for a given consumer good, because it's much harder for people to replace a job than to just start consuming one thing than another thing. And I think that the workplace is really a site of authoritarianism. And so, sure, do we need some markets? Absolutely. I think that there are domains in which we've proven empirically, like I would argue healthcare, we were going back and forth on that earlier, that taking those things out of the market could actually be much better. But are there domains you need markets in? Sure. I would say that for those domains that you need markets in, you can at least have those markets be worker-controlled firms. So I think that, like, if you look at Mondragon in Spain, employ 80,000 people, extremely successful company, does lots of research and development stuff, and is worker-owned. People get to elect management. People have operating agreements. They're like the equivalent of a union contract, but with no separate boss on the other side of the bargaining table. And so if you say, should we have as a goal of government policy that the private sector be more like Mondragon, or should it be more like Amazon or Walmart? I'd say it should be more like Mondragon. And one reason I think that is precisely that the more you worry that human nature is selfish and cruel, the less power you should want one person to have over another in the workplace or in society as a whole, which is why I want democracy in both cases.
So first of all, I understand the argument of employees owning companies. We have that in America too. Publix grocery chains is a great example in Florida. That could still happen in a market, but I guess this is, and you haven't taken a position on human nature, which I think is fine.
Well, I mean, I think I've taken a position, to be clear. Right?
There's some ambiguity in it. That's fine.
My position
is you said if you believe this, then
my,
you should
my
want
position
this.
is that human nature is a mess. That there's a lot of truth to both pessimistic and optimistic.
I think that's fair, and that's more
accounts. But I also think that to the extent that you worry about the bad stuff, that gives you a reason to want to distribute power evenly.
Right. So the best way to distribute power evenly, in the opinion of a conservative, would be first and foremost to empower the family and to allow not just workers, but entrepreneurs to create new companies and allow workers to be able to have abundant choices in the workforce or in the workplace. The best competition, the best way to empower people is choice, is competition. Is not to say that we are now going to mandate that you need some sort of labor designation on your board. That's been the opposite of choice. I'll give you an example, which is that if you have a very specific skill and you work for Ford, right now, Ford Motor Company, you have to be unionized to work for the United Auto Workers, right? It's mandated. Whereas like, well, if you had more competition, then maybe there might be non-labor there.
So this is what always confuses me about that point, because I hear conservatives saying this all the time, that if there's a union contract in place that says that to be hired for this job, you have to be a member of the union, or really is usually you have to either be a member of the union or pay an agency fee, but whatever, we can just say be a member of the union, that if you have that this is an unfreedom, that workers are being forced to do something against their will. But what confuses me about that is that any condition for hiring, you could say, is forcing workers to do something against their will, because obviously there's this wildly unequal bargaining power. Workers need the job way more than a company usually needs.
I think you're misrepresenting
any given
business. I really do.
Any given worker, that's by and large, it's much easier to replace a worker than it is for a worker to replace a job. And given that, sure, I agree that anytime you make something, you can only have this job, or you can only keep this job if you do X. That's a case where you're limiting people's freedom. But if you really go with that principle, then that should go for everything at a job. And I would say out of all the things that people are forced to do for certain jobs, the one that's least objectionable is you have to have this thing that actually protects, makes it harder to fire you, that that helps you keep more of the wealth you generate for the company in your pocket, that gives you some sort of say because you get to vote in a union contract. That's way less objectionable than all the other stuff you're forced to do to have a job.
Like what?
Like what? Well, I mean, I think if you work,
like not show up drunk, like.
I think we could agree that one's reasonable. And,
okay.
and if that was the extent of workplace authoritarianism in the United States,
hold on.
then
I really want to zero in on this.
I'd be much less concerned.
I want to zero in on this because
concerned about it. But
I want to zero in this because I'll agree that there's some externalities and some jerks and some dirtbags. Do you really believe? Let's say a majority.
Sure.
A majority of workers are being exploited by their bosses and that the owners of production. You really think that in America?
What do you mean by exploited?
You use the word. You said exploitation or workplace authoritarianism.
Actually, yeah, the word
that is your term.
The word I used was authoritarianism, not exploitation. But I'd be happy to talk about exploitation.
But let's say, do you think that a majority of workers, to use your terms, are living under a workplace autocrat or form of such right now in America? Let's say a majority, 50+1.
Yeah, much more than that.
So we're going to have definitely disagreement on this.
Sure. So they have a if you're saying, do the vast majority of people who work for a living in the United States work at workplaces where
they're living under some sort of tyranny without them realizing it?
So, okay, let's be clear about what we're talking about here. So they have that the vast majority of workers go to work in workplaces where they don't get to make any sort of managerial decisions. Those are made with it for them. And
why?
It's your way.
Ben, let's be fair. Why is it? Because someone took a risk to start a company and those workers didn't. Because they decided to go into their savings, to go to a bank, to take out a line of credit, to take a risk to start something new.
Do you think everybody has an equal ability to do that?
Of course not. I mean, absolutely not. Does everyone have an equal ability to go dunk a basketball or to become a decathlete? Of course not. I mean, does everyone have an equal ability to become a college professor? Of course not.
Sure.
I mean, that's a silly argument. Are some people going to create better widgets and gizmos than somebody else? Of course not. But what people do have an equal ability to do is they have an equal ability to take the risk. There are plenty of people that couldn't split the atom that work extra hours that go into their savings account.
Ability to take the risk.
Hold on. Why is that? Why isn't that someone?
The reason people don't have
millions of people start new businesses every year in our country.
That's completely consistent with this. The reason that people don't all have an equal ability to take the risk is that what would be risked is very different depending on your initial financial situation.
No, but there's plenty of people that...
Okay, but there's a difference between plenty of people...
Equal ability meaning that do you have the freedom to do that? Do you have the willingness to lever yourself up, to go to the bank and say, you know what, I want to take out a second mortgage on my home, and I'm going to go start some sort of shoe company on the side of the street. But then all of a sudden you're saying that the 5 people that are working in that cobbler store are being oppressed by the guy that might have gone 2 years without paying himself just to be able to start that small business. Okay. And so here's where I'm starting to just like, I wish you'd give a little more appreciation.
I would like to separate a couple
of issues how capital is deployed.
I would like to separate a couple of issues here because I think a lot of different things are being run together. First of all, on the subject of whether everybody has an equal ability to take entrepreneurial risk, I think that it's really interesting that in your example, you said, oh, you can take out a second mortgage on your home. So what does that suggest? That you own a home and your finances are generally good enough that would be approved, which obviously is a situation that tens of millions of Americans are not in.
So I think we're
Now,
coming to a good disagreement.
You know,
here.
but
I'll let-
also I would say that that when you talk about entrepreneurial risk, you say, well, it's not reasonable to say that workplaces where the people who are making decisions don't have any sort of democratic accountability to the overall workforce, that's not authoritarian because people, you know, in some cases, certainly not all cases, got in that position by taking entrepreneurial risk. I think that there are two different issues that are being conflated there, which is one, is it authoritarian, right? And that's just a question of what's the structure of the firm. And the second is
the
it
job
justified
voluntarily?
Because
they weren't stormed out of the house and put a gun to their head and say, now you must go work for Home Depot. They showed up and filled out a job application and wanted and hoped to get the job. Now, are there examples where that is the case, where they're
Notice that everything that you just said applies to agreeing to work at a company that's a closed shop, and so your contract specifies that you have to join the union. Nobody forced them at gunpoint to go apply for that job at a closed shop. That they could, if they want to find an open shop where they don't have to join a union, you know, good luck to them. They could find it.
No, I agree with that you can go work for a non-union shop, but you cannot be a public sector teacher in the state of California without being part of the National Education Association.
But you just said public. You just said public sector teacher. You could be a private sector teacher. So how is it that these
agree, but why should the taxpayer subsidize a union project?
Well, I think that what the taxpayers are subsidizing is, first of all, a better quality of education.
You think public schools are superior to private schools?
I think that Finland has some of the best schools.
No, America. You think
public?
Well,
no. But I mean, like Finland and America aren't like such radically different societies.
Of course they are. One is 7 million people. One is 335 million people.
Okay. Wait a second. Why is it that what works at 7 million in this case is not going to work with the 300 and some million?
I could name a lot of examples why.
Why?
First of all, we have way more different cultures. We have a different state-based model. And let me just say this one thing. First of all, Sweden has full school choice, and 1 in 5 families in Sweden send their kids to private school. So we could talk about Scandinavia as much as we want. But anyway, let's go back.
But which country has better schools, Finland or Sweden? Finland does, and that's with no private schools. So
and they also have very strict immigration.
I don't think that's why, but I think that you have. But I think that that you are going to get a better quality of education when people are less precarious. They can really commit to it. They have they're getting paid more, so you're going to attract better applicants. And also, I think that the teachers count too. I think that teachers deserve to have those things, and I'm all in favor of it. But the larger point was, if you're going to say that something isn't unfree,
or
if nobody's
autocratic,
forcing you at gunpoint to do it, then that should apply just as much to your objections to contracts that make people join unions.
So I want to go back. I'm going to talk about unions in circles, where I think if you want to join a union, fine, go ahead. Public sector unions are not given that sort of choice. And by the way, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, warned us about public sector unions. He said, all government employees should realize that the process of collective bargaining, as usually understood, cannot be transplanted into public service. He warned about the public sector union differentiation between private sector union differentiation. But I want to zero in on this because I think we have a really interesting point philosophically. Do you think if someone takes a risk in America, they should be able to keep the reward?
Not entirely, no. I mean, you don't think entirely. I mean, like, the only way you could think entirely is if you were an anarchist and you didn't think that we should.
But what are the limitations on that then?
I mean, again, I think that the question that you want to ask, if the question is some transfer of wealth justified? Because I think that's the real question, right? When are transfers of wealth justified? And I think that you need to go back to what are the principles that justify what you think a distribution of wealth in the first place should be. Now, you could think that whatever kind of distribution you get, letting the chips fall where they may in a free market, that's what's justified. I don't think that. I think that the distribution of wealth that we have, and I think taxation and redistribution, even in the sort of market socialist system that I was advocating earlier, I think you'd still need those things. But I think that the distribution of wealth that's justified is the one that would emerge from a social contract that people would agree to under certain circumstances.
So, what I guess it all comes down to numbers, I guess.
Well, no, I mean that's
so.
This isn't a claim about numbers. This is a claim about basic moral principles.
But
I think that the question is, if you were, the best version of something like contract theory, if you were behind John Rawls's veil of ignorance,
which I totally reject.
Sure, I mean, of course you totally reject it, Charlie.
I'm happy to get into the Rawlsian theory of justice.
You couldn't believe as the things that you believed if you didn't reject it. But I think that.
But I actually, I'm going to ask you about the veil of ignorance in a second.
If you're asking about what I think, I don't think that there's some magic number that like, oh, you can tax up to this, you can't tax up to that. I think that if you want to know whether a tax system is just, generally a system of how property works is just, you should ask, if you knew that you had to live in the society, but you didn't know who you're going to be in the society, would you agree to it? And the same way that if you didn't know whether you're going to be black or white, you wouldn't agree to racial discrimination being part of the rules of your society. If you didn't know whether you're going to be born into a poor family or a rich one, if you didn't know whether you'd have the particular skills to help you climb up the educational or career ladders of the professional managerial class, if you didn't know any of those things, how would you want the rules of society to work?
And
I think that's going to be the answer that's going to tell you when redistribution of wealth is justified.
I would want the rules of society to value action over favoritism, hard work over complacency, family creation over licentiousness, right? Liberty and the pursuit of virtue. Those things are right and wrong, regardless of what veil of ignorance, if I would be born in a lower class or a higher class. Those things are objectively good. So to use Rawls' own thought experiment.
So you talked about hard work there.
Yes.
So if you have a basic value to industriousness, if you have a basic objection to people getting things that you don't work for, here are two things that you should be against.
Okay.
Inheritance and stock ownership.
So let's talk about both of them. Stock ownership, you might be able to get me to agree. Inheritance, I think, is really cliche. Why do most people take big risks to create wealth? Which also goes to this question: how is wealth created?
Wealth is created by workers. Those are the ones who create wealth. No. The straw man that people usually trot out at this point in the argument is they say, oh, when you say workers are creating wealth, you're saying that there's a one-to-one how hard you work, to how much wealth is created. And of course, there are a million other factors that decide it. But everything that's being done, whether you're talking about ideas, which, by the way, big companies, that's going to be workers in the R&D department, much more than CEOs in most of those cases, or whether you're talking about who is making the products, who is selling the products, those are the people who are creating it. And I would say, if you want to say that the only incentive that you can get, that you cannot have a thriving dynamic economy without people being able to leave millions of dollars to their descendants, then I would say that it's very confusing, first of all, that even within traditional capitalist companies, you have plenty of childless people who are motivated to do that.
No, I think that's totally true.
But secondly, that you have cases like Mondragon, that you have very economically effective worker cooperatives. Nobody is creating some giant pile of wealth that they'll be able to pass on to their descendants, but people are still motivated to work, and these companies can still be very successful.
And look, you might be able to get me to agree on like 500 million, a billion, but again, the reason I wouldn't agree with it,
500 million, not like 5 million.
But like,
you should be able to pass on $5 million.
The reason I don't agree with it is that where's it going to go? To go fund some spy agency so that they could go spy on Americans through some FISA report. The point is that like
if you want to say we should abolish the spy agencies,
but the point is every time that there's this like, would you raise taxes to do this? The default answer is no, because we're funding that money would then be transferred away from some private utility to something that I consider to be a government that is doing a lot of harm and very little good. And so, but I guess there's this question of wealth being created, and we're kind of we're going at this from different angles.
That's a really interesting objection.
But if you would say, hey, it goes to charity instead of the IRS, then I might be able to agree with that, which is what we're doing at this debate, by the way, which goes that, this is so great. I do have a question for you, actually, as a sidebar. Why is it when you challenged me to debate, why didn't you say that all the proceeds would go to the IRS and to a private charity?
Well, I think that
does private charity do a better job?
No, I actually don't think that. First of all, the reason the debate hosting website, the way that works, was already there. I have nothing against private charity. I am fine with doing that. I obviously participated in doing that in this case.
Is it preferential to government?
I do not think that private charity can be a substitute for collective government action. I
Really?
think that the empirical track record is very clear that you're not going to get private charity that's going to be as effective. So, for example, and we also need to talk about what we mean by effective here, because this is a really crucial point. So there are a few different questions. One, are you going to get, like, is there some amount of private charity that you could give for medical expenses that's going to get you to a point where our rate of mortality amenable to healthcare is as low as it is in Canada or the UK? I don't think so. I think we've kind of run that experiment. Second point is, part of what I mean by effective is giving people freedom and a dignified life in ways that they don't have if they're worried about quitting jobs they hate because they'll lose their health insurance, or if they're doing things like starting GoFundMes to buy their insulin, which means that they have to craft, do you have enough of a tearjerker story that you'll stand out from the other 10,000 GoFundMes? I think people are far freer. I think people have far more dignity if they just get these things as rights just by virtue of being part of a society.
Yeah, that's where we're going to totally disagree. Where that private charity not only involves themselves in the person's life to hopefully be able to break them out of their economic circumstances, I would argue it's much more efficient in a variety of different ways. I mean,
I think if you
the $500 billion Americans give to charity every single year, I would argue does a far better job of offering a social safety net than the multi-trillions of dollars that we spend on social welfare
wait a second.
in a variety of different ways.
How about the $500 billion we spend on charity? Take the part of it that's spent, for example, on healthcare, and compare that to comparable, economically comparable countries where healthcare is provided as a right to everybody outside of the market. Which one does a better job? America, where you have to, if you don't have health insurance and you don't qualify, for Medicaid or Medicare, you have to beg on GoFundMe, or countries like Canada and the UK, which it seems like by all the obvious metrics, who lives longer, who has a lower rate of infant mortality, who has a lower rate of mortality amenable to healthcare, all of those obvious metrics, it seems like those government healthcare programs do way better.
You won't hear me bragging on many aspects of the American healthcare system. Many of it is very cronyistic and corrupt. But to say we're not spending government money on it is just not.
Well, did I say that?
No, but you're implying it. I mean,
I don't think I said or implied.
We have trillions and trillions of dollars we spend on government-run healthcare.
Sure, I think it would actually be vastly more efficient if you look at how much is being spent for what results. I don't think there's any question that Canada and the UK are getting way more bang for their buck in terms of government spending on healthcare.
So the UK has a total. So you would have the government take over hospitals.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that would be better. I don't think.
So where would medical innovation come from?
Well, medical innovation would come from exactly where it comes from right now, which is mostly the public sector. If you look at pharmaceuticals, and this is really good. I really like this argument because this is something people often trot out in defense of private health insurance. Well, you need that, so you have these incentives to develop pharmaceuticals. If you're looking at NMEs,
not just pharmaceuticals, treatments, right?
new molecular entities, which are genuinely new drugs, not just you tweak it a little bit and you slap your corporate brand on it. 75% of those are developed already in government-funded labs. I think this idea that there's a lot of private innovation in there, I think is at the very least wildly overstated. I think that you can absolutely have healthcare innovation without it being the case that within hospitals or when people need to pay for treatment, you have this element of private profit, which I think has been a disaster in the healthcare system.
Do you think there's a reason why America has the highest quality healthcare, not for the most amount of people, but the highest quality healthcare in the world? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that
that is inarguable. If you can afford it, it is the best healthcare on the planet.
Sure. I mean, if something is that if you can skip to the head of the line by having enough money, then absolutely, you can get world-class healthcare. But the question I'm interested in is not are well-off people or really well-off people.
It's a segue to my next question.
Well, okay, but the question I'm interested in is not, are they going to have better healthcare than the average person in Canada or the UK? What I'm interested in is the average person in the United States going to have a better experience with the healthcare system and have better healthcare outcomes than those other systems deliver? And that's just inarguable
the question,
that they have better
the
outcomes
question is
and
then,
better
how
experiences.
do you get something that a few people have to have a lot of people have? More government intervention or market forces applied that allow things to be cheaper and faster delivered and better delivered? Market forces do a better job for that all the time, whether it be in technology or transportation.
I think that there's a structural reason why market forces are not going to be as effective in healthcare as they are going to be in many other areas. And that structural reason is not some like special radical Marxist thing that I think. That structural reason is something that you'll find in your wildly pro-capitalist neoclassical Econ 101 textbook, which is that supply and demand are going to do a much better job of shaping things in the direction of consumer preferences for things that are pretty elastic. You drive past one gas station, you see, that looks a little bit too expensive. You drive a few blocks more, you get to another gas station. Those market forces are going to do a much better job of delivering for the consumer there than in cases like health insurance, which is wildly inelastic. For one thing, if you need heart surgery, you will pay any amount that is in your power to get it, for the same reason that if we didn't have, public fire services, it was just like in ancient Rome where like Crassus would like go around with slaves with buckets of water and offer to buy people's homes, for his prior service spread out. Yeah, people are going to sell for whatever price you're going to pay in those circumstances. People are going to pay whatever you're demanded to get heart surgery. And even when it comes to less dramatic uses of the health insurance system, like just, let's say all you need from the healthcare system is once every 90 days, you need your doctor to sign off on some prescription you've been on for 10 years. It's still a giant stressful pain to switch providers that, you have to find somebody.
And I'm not defending every detail of the American system.
The point isn't about the details. The point is that this is a structural reason that our demand for healthcare is way less elastic than our demand for other consumer goods.
The American healthcare system,
which means that market forces are going to be less effective there.
Market, though. We don't have price transparency. We have an oligarchy of the hospitals. We don't have health savings accounts in most states. We don't allow health insurance across state lines. Now, while I agree that there is this, that at times there can be externalities of where the profit motive is not a perfect fit, where it's like, oh, I want to go buy a t-shirt. Like, okay, yeah, I have leukemia. Like, that's not the same thing. I get that. Where the charts and the graphs can't explain all of that. That generally the best fit line, though, of market principles can help for the vast majority of things that are not in that 10% category of life-saving treatments. Because, and you know this, the vast majority of people going to the doctor are not like, I have a gunshot wound, I have leukemia or cancer.
That's what I just said.
No, I know, but market forces in those cases, you could agree, could be very, very instructive and very helpful.
Well,
empowering the consumer and price transparency and bringing down prices.
So I think that here are the things that we know. That as a matter of fact, market forces are right now, we could argue about the diagnosis, but right now, they are creating lousy outcomes.
But I would argue
in the American healthcare system.
We hardly have market forces in most healthcare. Like most hospitals are nonprofit, government-run agencies.
This is what it sounds like to me. Like when you say that they have, all I can think is this sounds like nothing so much as some ultra-leftists saying, well, look, sure, Soviet economic planning had a lot of problems, but that's because it wasn't communist enough. They still had money.
I'm arguing that
because if we look at the systems that actually exist, then the United States has one of the most marketized healthcare systems in the entire world, and certainly relative to developed rich countries, we have some of the worst outcomes. And if you want to say, well, if we made it even more marketized, we would actually have better outcomes than all of the systems
in certain aspects
that are socialized. I think that's a leap of faith.
Let me give you a great example. So you want to empower regular people, consumers. Would you agree that there should be a federal law to mandate hospitals publicly publish their prices, price transparency?
Yeah, sure, I'm all for that.
Okay, that's a market fix. We want people to have the information, because what they have right now is they're driving down the street, they don't even see the gas prices. They don't even know what price anything is. And so that's just an example of how hospitals, and being kind of this oligopoly of nonprofit profit mixture, which is incredibly corrupt, that they are hiding behind this idea to not empower the consumer. What I'm saying, and I think there's some middle ground here, that we want to empower patients to know, like, wait a second, you're going to charge me $45 for a Tylenol? Like,
You
that's
know,
dumb.
Yeah, I agree that price transparency would be better, but what would be even better?
And by the way, that's not every conservative agrees with me. Some are like, they can do whatever they want. I think that's silly.
Okay, well, that's good. Put that alongside the progress on the Bezos,
on Hunter Biden, Jeff Bezos, and price transparency, right? So I don't want to spend all of our time on healthcare, but yes,
but let me just say,
because there's so much more I want to get to.
Sure, but let me say one last thing about that. What would be even better than having transparency on what you're getting, what you're paying for things that you badly need, which doesn't have to be as dramatic as a gunshot wound. Insulin is something that people badly need. Psychiatric medication is often something that people badly need, and if they get off it, without proper medical, circumstances, that's going to be a disaster for them. That what would be even better than price transparency is not treating those things as commodities. If we look at the systems in the world today, the ones that seem to do a lot better, at the very least, go much further in the opposite direction.
I'm not going to get into waiting lines in Canada or any of that, because some of that stuff is
really happy to get into.
Some of that is very much disputed, and quite honestly, I'm not prepared to go into that as much. So I just kind of want to.
Okay, I would say
I do want to. I'll let you have one comment on that, because I'm not.
Sure. One comment.
And I'll allow people to do their own research on Canadian waiting lines. But yes.
Sure. I think that if you want to talk about Canadian waiting lines,
healthcare rationing, because it's not unlimited, therefore you have to prioritize who gets it, right?
No healthcare system is unlimited. But the question is always, if there's a limit, what is the principle that you use to decide?
That's interesting. What would you say that is?
Who gets
the youngest?
And I would say that absolutely the worst way to do it is for it to be made not by doctors, making decisions about, okay, what do we think is going to pay off realistically? Is how long can we keep this person alive versus, any of those things. The worst way to do it is to ration it by money, which is what we do. So what I think about Canadian waiting lines is there is some truth to it. There are some things.
Thank you for saying that. Not everyone says that. So I agree.
That you do have longer wait times for.
I appreciate you saying
I don't think it's as dramatic as people say it is.
You might be right.
When you start looking at
numbers,
numbers, but there are some things that you have longer waiting times for. But I think that part of the reason you have longer waiting times is that more people are in line. We don't exclude people from the line because they can't afford it. And I think as a matter of basic human rights, that's good not to exclude people from the line. And two, if the reason we're worried about it is because we think that people will die waiting, I think we can look at all the statistics comparatively between the United States and Canada. And I know a lot of people want to say that all of that's just lifestyle stuff. But I grew up right by the Canadian border in Michigan. All the Canadians I know
in the Upper Peninsula.
No, in the Lower Peninsula, but I actually had to drive south to get to the nearest Canadian border, Detroit, Windsor.
Oh wow! Okay, you were near the Canadian border.
And all the Canadians I know love beer and hockey and Tim Hortons donuts. I don't think that the reason that they have these better healthcare outcomes is that they're that much healthier than Americans. And certainly, I think the infant mortality differences, the lifestyle of infants is very similar everywhere. They just kind of lie there. And you could say there are certain factors, parent behaviors that create differences there. But I think even there, like way more Brits smoke than Americans. The rate of drinking is higher. That
is definitely true.
I think that and those are the things that are most immediately going to impact that. And then especially, I think the one you're going to have the hardest time explaining is mortality amenable to healthcare. Because
let me just make my position clear. Yeah. Why I think some of your critiques are actually very valid and helpful. Where you totally lose me is government takeover of hospitals. And because, let me ask you.
Okay. Can we at least do government takeover of insurance?
Well, let's do hospitals, because that really is the question, right?
Sure.
So let me just ask you a question, because I didn't want to spend this much time on it, but now you've got me interested. Do you think the VA works well?
So I think that I would say two things about that. So the first is that if you actually look at surveys of people, and sometimes defenders of private health insurance love to do that because they say, hey, look at these surveys where most people say they're happy with their health insurance. I think that's very unclear what that means. Or does that mean that you're happier with it than you would be with not having to pay for it and actually saving money like most people would with Medicare for All, even according to the Mercatus Institute? But like the people who are most likely to say that they're happy with it are seniors on Medicare and veterans and active duty military personnel who are the ones who are living under the British system. But are there cases where people have to wait way too long for certainly like psychiatric care?
Do you see where I'm getting? I'm saying this in good faith. The VA is a mess in a lot of circumstances.
But I think that And I think that unfortunately there's a cycle sometimes where conservatives are successful in getting funding for things cut or certainly not increased the way it should be. And then they use the results of that to undermine it. But I think one big difference, if you accept for the sake of argument that despite those surveys that I just gave, that overall it's way worse, then the question is, what's the difference between the NHS in Britain and the VA? And I think that the biggest difference, why the NHS has all these great outcomes, certainly compared to the US healthcare system, I think the difference is that the NHS is for everybody. Only a small minority of Americans are veterans, so what goes on in the VA is not really something that's on most people's radar most of the time.
Let me ask you another question.
So there's a lot less political incentive to care about it.
Usually, typically, in urban areas, are the county-run hospitals the best?
I'm sure they're not. They have a, because I think that oftentimes they're severely underfunded, that they, it's certainly.
You get what I'm getting at here, though.
So I get what you're getting at, but I think the question is, why? Let's accept that, right? Like I'm certainly not going to pretend like I have a bunch of stats that are memorized.
Yeah, and even let's just use Atlanta. The Emory Hospital is way better than
on county.
And I could say for personal experience, it's just the Emory Hospital is far superior to just county.
But here's what I think is the more relevant point of comparison: not when it's a municipality, which is often, cash starved in general, and it's going to be, I think, actually much less efficient than doing it federally.
They do receive a lot of federal money,
but why is it then that you think that in Britain or in some Scandinavian countries where most hospitals are publicly owned, their healthcare outcomes are so much better?
That's a very fair question. I have my own personal opinions of it. Not every healthcare outcome is better. We have a higher cancer survivability rate for certain sort of treatments. We have a higher quality of care for certain people. There's some people that conjecture in the healthcare field. It could be because of many different underlying health conditions of how obese America is, where we are more obese than these other comparable countries, also our diet, nutrition. But it's going to be difficult to pinpoint a cause. If your argument is it's because that the government is running it, I reject the argument simply and totally because I know the government runs almost nothing efficiently and correctly. But I guess that's the crux of the argument that you're saying. That you're trying to sell me that in a multivariate analysis, you put all those other things aside. That it's because some guys on government payroll.
I don't put all those things aside. We just went through a detailed argument about why this is a more plausible explanation. Now it's fine to be not convinced by that argument, but I think describing it as, I'm just dismissing everything else rather than giving you reasons why those explanations make a lot less sense. I mean, what is the biggest difference between the US and Canada? What's the biggest difference between the United States and the United Kingdom? It's not that we're much healthier. As you say, a lot of things that are relevant here, like drinking, are actually
we are a little bit more obese.
Or actually, yeah, a little bit more. But if you look at it, I don't think it's dramatic enough to make this the big distinction. And also, I think the healthcare outcomes where you think they, look, 36% obesity is worse than 30% obesity, but I don't think that's going to explain everything we're talking about.
That's a big deal.
Sure. I mean, I am all in favor.
And I will say this.
We could talk about what
you'll agree with
this.
If you want to think, if I want to go to the final thing that we'll agree on with this, the biggest difference is, I think, the preying pharmaceutical companies in our country.
Well, that is certainly one important
difference. But let's put the hospital thing aside and delivery of care and all that
stuff.
Well,
I was just going to say that.
I think pharmaceutical companies have, and so I'm just going to say this.
Sure.
Because I think it actually is the best argument to say that market principles, and I would have made this argument if I were you, but you didn't. That's okay.
Well, I mean,
but you kind of did. But like, I'll just say that, like, if you're Pfizer, the money is in the middle of keeping someone not healed, but keeping back as an annuity to keep buying your drug, right? And this comes as someone who can't stand the major pharmaceutical companies that tries to be more homeopathic and kind of solutions in all of this, where not conservatives don't talk about that enough. If there was a difference, I would say that AstraZeneca, I don't even know if AstraZeneca is an American company, but Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and BioNTech, which was an originally an Israeli company.
List, but
but those are the vaccine manufacturers.
Which, by the way, is a perfect example of what I'm talking about with the pharmaceutical companies, because most of that research was government funded.
Which might have had questionable outcomes. We'll see. So I guess we're not going to get into that. That's too much fun for right now. Okay. Let me ask you another.
The point I was trying to make, just for the record, is the outcomes where you say that the U.S. is better.
And not every metric, but it's fair. I'm not defending the U.S.
Sure,
healthcare system. I'm not their defense attorney, right?
I understand you're not defending
because we can go to Singapore, we can go to other places that have.
Well, I mean, Singapore is much less free market than the U.S. system.
Decentralized. Well, they're more economically free.
I mean,
but again, I'm not a defense lawyer for the American healthcare system.
Singapore's healthcare system is like Obamacare and steroids.
But trying to convince the American public, what you're trying to do is say, hey, let's nationalize the hospitals, nationalize the private industry, private insurance, which is what you eventually want to get to do, is obviously done in arrival with me, and I think a majority of Americans for a good reason.
Sure, but what I was going to say was those metrics where you say that we do better are things that I think a big part of the reason that we're going to do better on those is those aren't about overall outcomes for everybody. They're about specific kinds of services that not everybody's going to get in the first place. And that goes back to what we were saying earlier, that sure, if you can afford it, absolutely.
So yeah,
best anywhere.
The final thing I'll say, because I want to get on these other topics, is
sure.
We know how to get things cheaper and better, and that's usually market forces with some externalities being handled. So I'll give you one example. We might agree on Hunter Biden, Bezos, price transparency, and I don't think pharmaceutical companies should be allowed to advertise. I think it's the weirdest thing ever. They're running, ask your doctor about this. Like, if you need it, then your doctor should tell you about it. You shouldn't be propagandized by the pharmaceutical companies.
If you're asking your doctor if this is right for you, that's a drug dealer, not a doctor. But
I agree.
But I think that
I totally agree.
But
because it hurts the family. All right, so I want to get to this next thing because we can keep on going in circles about all this. Which is okay. This could go forever, and we'll wrap it up eventually. I promise. Do you believe in absolute truth?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just interested.
I mean, do you? Let me make sure I understand what you're asking. Right?
Yes.
So, when you say absolute truth, do you just mean that whether things in general about any subject are true or false?
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at, and I hate to use like the cliche word, is would you consider yourself a postmodernist? That truth is relative.
No, absolutely not.
So that's good. Do you think that postmodernism and that kind of movement is harmful or helpful to the American left?
I think it's harmful. I don't.
That's
think,
interesting.
Elaborate
that.
I don't think we should believe in alternative facts any more than anybody else should. I think that what's true is I think that what's true, generally speaking, it depends a little bit, what we're talking about, and I'm not saying the only reason I'm saying
like
that
Newtonian physics, like force equals mass time acceleration.
Sure.
Right?
Well, yeah. I mean, technically, Newtonian physics is a good enough approximation for like mid-sized dry goods. The real stuff is like quantum physics, relativistic physics.
Of course, but you understand what I'm saying.
But I understand what you're saying, and I agree. Right? Absolutely. I think that truth is objective. I think if you want to get into an argument about who in practice, who has political power, is actually denied that, more than others.
I don't think there'll actually be much fruit in that discussion. Then we could get into that. He said.
If your question is whether truth is objective, then I think it is. I did if I could slip one in.
Sure. You can ask me questions
too. It is a little bit it's a little bit off the track of most of what we've been talking about, but I have been wondering about this, right? Because I have seen I've seen some of your previous debates, and something's come up at a couple of them. It's not a politics question at all, at least directly.
Is it more metaphysics?
Okay, there you go. It's more metaphysical question. Is I've seen you make this claim that you'll say things like, well, there's no social contract, our rights come from God.
Yes.
So first thing is, can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah, just as the founders did, as they said in the Declaration, the laws of nature and nature's God, where whether you believe it's an actual being of a triune God like I would, or kind of more of a deistic type God, that you have rights and something gave it to you, and that the social contract that we have recognizes a transcendent order.
So if something gave it to you, I assume that what you mean by something gave it to you.
I would believe an omniscient, omnipotent being, but I'm not proselytizing you to believe
that,
right?
I'm not. I don't think you are. I mean, I was the one who brought it up. I'm
sure.
Just curious.
Okay. No.
They had a so if because when you say that something gave it to you, you could read that at least two different ways. So one of them is, and I assume this is not what you think, but one of them is that literally in a cause and effect way, we have certain legal rights because of the intervention of God. But of course, it's clearly not the case that God is stopping China from putting dissidents in jail. I assume what you mean is that we morally have a right to those things because God gave it to you.
That's correct. But if you're asking, do I believe that in a God that can intervene
Well,
supernaturally,
sure,
I do.
Sure, you can, but I mean, like
And
as a.
But I'm happy to get into that.
Sure, fair enough.
I don't think there'll be much.
I don't think that's actually relevant to the question.
Yeah.
But I'm trust me, whatever else I am, I'm a huge philosophy nerd. I'm always happy to talk about that. But
and I have a question about Christopher Hitchens for you.
Sure, awesome.
Because I know you wrote a book on it.
I did. Just finished a couple weeks ago. But I'd like to thank you. If you say that God is the moral, is the reason why morally we should have these rights.
The unmoved movement.
That I don't understand how that's going to get around like the Euthyphro problem. Like if you say, okay, so Euthyphro, there's this dialogue written by Plato where Socrates is arguing with this ancient Greek holy man named Euthyphro, and they're talking about the definition of holiness. And it's going to take just a second, but I promise I'm going to get through this quickly and we'll get to the point. So they're arguing about the definition of holiness, and Euthyphro says the holy is that which the gods love, and Socrates asks him this simple question: do the gods love it because it is holy, or is it holy because the gods love it? So translate into what we're talking about here, the question would be, is it morally just that these rights be recognized because that's what God wants, or does God want it because it would be morally unjust to deny them? Because if you say
both,
okay, well, that's a really interesting answer. Never heard that one before. I want to get into it, but just to finish up with what the problem is, if you say that God wants you to have those rights because it would be morally unjust to deny it to you,
and
that suggests that it's morally unjust for some reason other than God wanting it, and that the God part, at least on the moral question, is going to be sort of beside the point. That they have that whatever the reason is why it would be, God thinks it would be unjust, is a reason that's going to be just as available to the atheist or the agnostic. Whereas if you say it's morally unjust because God doesn't want it, and God doesn't have some reason why it would be morally unjust, then it's just like, lucky for us, I guess, that God wants us to have free speech and freedom of religion, equal rights for women, because he could just as easily want us to organize a society like the Taliban did.
Right. So a lot to unpack there. I would say both, because through divine revelation and through reason, especially through many of the writings of the early church fathers, we believe in a metaphysical God that not just gave us the law and this interpretation of natural rights because he believes there's a certain way we should live, right? But also because of divine revelation, we realize what is morally just and unjust, right? So believing in the Christian God or the Judeo-Christian God, we would reject what the Taliban is doing for a variety of different reasons, right?
I understand how you can say that through divine revelation, you can figure out what God thinks.
And the tradition of the West.
Sure.
Right. And going on Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Aquinas, Augustine.
Well, I mean, this is,
we can go to
we're talking about the Plato's objection.
Yeah, and I'm happy to go through Aristotle's ethics and metaphysics with you too.
Sure. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
So I think that I understand how you say through divine revelation, we find out what God thinks is just or unjust, but that's a slightly different question from what makes it just or unjust.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Just can you clarify it a little bit?
So the question is, the question you answer with both is, does God want us to have these rights because it'd be unjust if we didn't have them?
Yes.
Or would it be unjust if we didn't, or is the only reason it would be unjust if we didn't have them because God doesn't want us to have them?
The answer is both. And the answer is in self-evident, is that you can find it both in the Word of God and through self-evident exploration of the natural world.
But those are
They're
answers
not contradictory
to the question of how you find out what God wants.
Yes.
But that's a little bit different from saying, why does God want that thing?
Oh, okay, good. God wants us these things because he wants us to live fruitful and multiply, as he says in the scriptures. God does not want us to live oppressively. He doesn't want us to fail or to, in my own biblical theological interpretation, which you can feel free to mock and dismiss, but
trust me, I'm not going to mock it.
Ideal. We had a whole fun little thing last.
I have tremendous respect for Christian socialists like Cornel West or Dr. Martin Luther King.
Well, definitely not going to find me as one of those.
Or to pick a third example of a progressive Christian, just at random, pick one out of the hat. My wife Jennifer. I have tremendous respect for all of these people, but
God wants us to live freely.
So if God wants us to live fruitfully, to flourish.
To be fruitful and multiply.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
To occupy till I come, be salt and light throughout every corner of the earth.
Okay. So would it still, if the reason that God wants us to be fruitful, if the reason that God wants us to live, flourishing lives, whatever, is because it's objectively good to live flourishing lives, it would still be, if hypothetically it turned out somehow, right, there was some magic way of checking this, right, that there wasn't a God, it would still be the case that it was objectively morally good.
That's correct.
Lives.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So God's law in our interpretation of natural rights is true regardless if you recognize it's granted by God or not. So I'll give you an example: the Decalogue, right, the 10 Commandments or the 10 statements that were given to Moses. If you follow those 10 things as an atheist or Christopher Hitchens fan, you're going to live a good life. Not lying, not stealing, not murdering, honoring your parents, you're not committing adultery. Those are things that are built into the natural law. That's an easy 10 examples to give. Now, but also those things are true if you recognize they're given to by God, of which I believe. So those are both independently true.
So, because you said two things here, and I'm not sure how long we want to spend on this, but just
I mean, I'm enjoying it.
But you're sure. But you're saying two.
I hope
things.
you're enjoying it.
No, I am enjoying this. I just also realized that this is a little self-indulgent. That I was really curious about this thing. That's a little off topic.
I hope it's clarifying you, not confusing you. So
okay. Well, here's the part that I do still, unfortunately, find a little bit confusing. So you're saying two things about this that I don't see how they fit together. One of them is that it would be objectively morally good for us to live flourishing lives, whether God existed or not. And then the other is that God grants us these rights in the sense that, the reason why, that God somehow is the reason why morally these are good, these are things that we should have a right to.
Yes, both of those things. So if there's someone right now in some country, island country, and they independently come to the conclusion in the natural law that they should marry and have children, not murder and not kill, regardless of them becoming in contact with the Word of God or where that came from, they're going to live flourishing lives. So that's what we mean by the natural law.
Sure, no,
that someone in Papua New Guinea or in Paris will equally succeed if they do these.
Sure, I understand, but
maybe I'm not answering the question. I'm not trying to dodge it.
Sure,
but,
no, but like what you're talking about seems like, forgive me if this is a slightly pretentious way to put it, but like it seems like what you're talking about isn't really metaphysics. In other words, what makes something true. Right, what you're talking about is really epistemology, how we find out that it's true. So
I'm happy to go into the metaphysics of it too.
Sure. But the question is just like, I understand that if God's granting us these rights is what makes it morally good for us to have these rights, then it can still be morally good for people to have these rights, even if they don't know about that. Right? I understand that part.
Okay,
but
good.
But that's a little bit of a different question from if it objectively weren't true. That
we're not true.
If it were objectively not true
that God exists,
would it still be the case that these would be morally good?
Got it. I understand the question. I reject the premise.
Well, I mean, I understand
because like it's like asking.
I understand you think that's not the case.
It's asking in like a hypothetical world if like there is no unmoved mover and like some creator.
Sure.
So I guess what you're saying is what I value as the natural law. If there was no natural lawgiver, would the natural law still be true? To be consistent, I guess.
Okay.
Yes.
Well.
But I reject the premise because you're asking me to believe something.
Well, I'm not asking you to believe.
Or to entertain something.
Sure.
So to answer your question, I guess, would the natural law be true if God did not write the natural law? Yeah.
Okay. So.
But I think that the natural law is true because it's epistemologically correct, teleologically correct in our purpose and our driven, theologically correct and spiritually correct.
Okay, but that still seems like we've traveled some distance from saying that God gave us these rights in the sense that the reason it's morally good that we have these rights is that God wants us to have them.
And I believe that is true.
Okay.
Because our existence is breathed into by a creator.
Sure, but I think you can think three things are all true. One is that the reason we exist is because of God. Right?
Yes.
And you can even think that the reason maybe there are certain natural facts about the way that people are such that certain things are good for us and help us live flourishing lives, and that the reason for those natural facts is that God created it that way.
Yes.
You could believe those two things while also believing that what makes it morally good that we do these things and live flourishing lives
is both. Yeah, I said that.
Well, okay, but I don't understand how it could be both.
It's both because God commanded it, and because God created it and God ordained it, and also that it's good for human existence through the moral construct that we all accept.
So if God,
they're both simultaneously true.
So I mean, maybe this is another thing where I'm asking you to entertain something you don't want to entertain, but like,
if God was dead,
no, if God had commanded something different, would that thing therefore be good?
So that's a premise and a presupposition that.
Well, I understand you don't.
It's like saying actually the Bible deals with this, right?
Sure,
so
okay.
the Bible deals with this in the story of Abraham and Isaac, or is it Isaac and Jacob when he brings up the son to sacrifice? Abraham and Isaac, yeah. Abraham and Isaac, where God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his child.
Come on, Charlie, I'm the atheist.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to make sure I was precise. When God actually never commanded him to do that. It was a test of his faith, right? At the very moment he delivered a replacement sacrifice at the very last moment.
So this is a perfect example.
That's a question of obedience to God. Do you do something that is against the moral law if God commands you to do it?
So you think that if hypothetically God had wanted him to go through with it, that the right thing to do would be to go through with it?
Yeah, if you believe in an omniscient, omnipotent, unmoved mover, but this text doesn't show that. Yes, I mean the answer even for an atheist would be a yes. If you believe there was a God.
I don't think that follows. I think that you could be, if there was a omniscient and omnipotent but morally bad reason being that created the universe, then I would have a self.
I think that's a fair thing to say.
I would have a self-interested reason to go along with it, the same way that if I was living under Stalin, I would have a self-interested reason to go along with what Stalin wanted. But that wouldn't mean I would have a moral reason.
But under the Christian text and the Bible, there is not a commandment that is against what we would consider as moral in the Western tradition.
Well,
and you would probably totally disagree. Let me ask you a question about Christopher Hitchens.
Sure, let's
okay, because we got 5 minutes left.
Sure.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
I am delighted to do 5 minutes of Hitchens.
Help me.
Sure.
Give the best argument, because what are your metaphysics? Are you an atheist?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you hope you're wrong?
Do I hope I'm wrong? I hope it depends on what that means. I mean, if
do you hope there's a God?
I certainly don't hope there's a God who's going to send me to hell for being an atheist. That wouldn't be a good outcome.
Do you want eternal life?
Do I? Depends what kind of eternal life.
Like eternal bliss.
Eternal bliss, if that were
seeing your loved ones.
Sure. If that were on offer, I would take it.
I respect that answer, because not every atheist answers that way. Some atheists say no.
I would. There are a lot.
They want to be right more than what is good.
Sure. There are a lot of things about that, like standard theologically orthodox Christians believe about God I would not be happy to be true, but that one I would definitely be happy to
an acceptance of a savior that could give you eternal life. So the fine-tuning argument.
I don't think that's exactly what I said, but it's probably not worth doing. The fine-tuning argument.
Fine-tuning, which is Christopher Hitchens said is the best argument for those people that believe in a creator. The fine-tuning argument is that we live in a planet that's perfectly positioned. You could do better than I could. How do you personally wrestle with and unpack the fine-tuning argument?
Sure.
Do you ever have doubts that there is a God?
Honestly, I kind of wish that I could say yes, because it makes me sound more,
reasonable.
More reasonable. It sounds dogmatic if I say no, but honestly, I think no is the honest answer. I think that so why the fine-tuning argument doesn't move me very much,
because it didn't move Hitchens, but it
piqued
his curiosity.
I mean, I might even go along with the comparative claim that it might be better than the other arguments, but they have but the reason that I find the fine-tuning argument unconvincing is that I don't think we can move backwards from it would be really improbable, like given a certain setup, this outcome would be really improbable. This outcome happened, therefore that setup is wrong. So just a small example that I think makes vivid why I don't find that plausible. If you shuffle a deck of 52 cards and you deal out the ace of spades, it's clearly a bad argument to say, well, if the person was cheating.
Yeah, the deck has more than 52 cards, though.
They were doing, sure.
Because the probability, the fine-tuning
But I think the point of principle is that the same reason why it would be unreasonable to say, well, there's only a 1 in 52 chance that a fair shuffle would have gotten me this, and this happened, therefore it wasn't a fair shuffle, is that you could run that argument for any card, that it would be much more likely that if you had the dealer was cheating to give you the 3 of hearts, you get the 3 of hearts, that if it was random. And I think that no matter how big you make the deck, the same point is going to apply. That if it's 1 out of 500 trillion or whatever, that the chance of this, well, sure, it's the fact that this outcome is the one that happens. You could say would be more likely if there was a being who wanted it to happen, but you could also say the same thing about all but one of the other 500 trillion.
So let me ask you a question, like the minute, 10
Sure,
seconds we
sure,
have remaining, which is not that. Teleological argument, what's the purpose of life?
So I think that I definitely cannot do in 10 seconds, but if I could have like an extra 45 or so, I could take a run at it.
What is the purpose? What is the telos? What is the place you're aiming for?
So I think the teleological argument for the existence of God is a slightly different thing.
No, I'm just saying, what is your teleology? What's the purpose of being?
Okay, all right. Because you said teleological argument, we could get into why I don't think that works. But I think that I think that the purpose of being, if you mean the moral purpose, what makes it like morally good to live life in a certain way. We could certainly talk about what counts as personal virtue. We could certainly talk about what counts as moral justice. I think a good, thriving life is one where you can pursue what you regard as a good and fulfilling life, which I gotta say, I think you're enabled to do if you have the kind of economic supports that make you not stay in jobs you hate, etc. I cannot resist throwing that in.
That's okay. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah,
maybe we could do it again.
I'd love to.
It was fun to explore ideas everywhere from metaphysics to ethics to post office adoration. Yeah. Is that fair to say? Defense.
Yes, strong.
We agreed on Hunter Biden, Jeff Bezos, price transparency, and pharmaceutical commercials. Besides that, it's a bunch of really good disagreements, but we have clarity and not agreement, which I hope we have more of. Thank you. Anything you want to plug in closing? Your new book on Christopher Hitchens?
Yeah, new book on Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens, What He Got Right, How He Went Wrong, and Why It Still Matters, should be out in December. The show is called GTAA, Give Them an Argument. And I guess the last thing I would just say is that as much as I do disagree with you about, I guess you just gave the list of exceptions.
Metaphysics, the point of existence.
Sure.
Eternity.
All of those things. I really do appreciate the fact that you're willing to do this. A lot of conservatives are not.
Hey, it was fun. We want to have dialogue, which means through reason.
Sure.
Is the original word. Thank you, Ben. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thanks.
That is how Ben got his pretty wife. What is all that?
Don't know. Yeah, so that was the Charlie Kirk debate. That
ended in clarity.
Yeah. Well, next time, we could have a backup binder and do youth throw and some of these other things. No, I really enjoyed that. I appreciate that. JB says, very gracious, Ben. Shout out to Charlie for hosting the conversation. I will admit, though, that was also that was a little bit of a double-edged thing, because that was like saying something nice to him, but that was also my way of taking a little jab at all of these other people who are much less, who are not at all willing to do this. Looking at you, Mr. Shapiro, that offer's been on the table for a long time. Crowder, etc. But yeah, so that was like a little bit, it was a little bit obnoxious, but it was also like, hey, shouts out to, credit where credit's due. He was willing, that he was willing to do this.
Now, those people might retract these marriage offers once they find out that the 7-Eleven is where you like to go on dates. But
it's not at all true.
Of course, we don't have to get into that.
Not
here.
At all true. This is a
It's just where he buys his wine.
Yeah, I don't know. Thoughts?
My thoughts.
Oh, go for it. No, you go for it.
My thoughts are that Charles Manson and Jay Hutch are hilarious.
The Charles Manson of the comments, not the Charles Manson who probably more people are aware of.
Why not both?
That's going to end up in a binder somewhere out of context. The Burgis family finds Charles Manson hilarious. Then, as we discussed, I have my whiskey. I think toast to a pretty good job, I would say.
All right, appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, that was absolutely fun to watch because, like, Charlie could barely keep up with you most of the time, and it was very obvious. And then he would try like with the whole Medicare thing in the second half. He he was trying desperately to strawman you, and then change the subject really quickly, and then you just kept stopping him. So that was fun.
Appreciate that. Phil H, thank you for the super chat. I know we got a few before. And I think we put them all on screen. If we missed any, please, let me know. But I want to. Jay Hutch talks too much. Says not the first time I've been grouped in with Charles Manson, and surely not the last. Yeah, if you're listening to this on the podcast later, honestly, even if you do it with the sound off because you already heard the debate. Go back and watch the YouTube just for the comments that were put on the screen from the viewers. Some of this really was gold.
But Jay Andrew, that was definitely one of the things that I noticed while I was there. Ben would be trying to destroy him with a point, and he would be like, "Well, and Ben was like, "No, I'm gonna get this out." It was very entertaining.
Yeah. So yeah, the previous super chat, the question was, is Charlie a true believer? And I'd say, I guess my question would be in what, right? I mean, as far as his, Christian belief, far be it from me to presume to know, what's in his soul. I do think that he, given his emphasis on that, I do think that, yeah, I find it a little bit surprising that he doesn't seem to know what's in the book a little bit more than he does. But
not everybody can be my mother.
Yes. Franny would have done much better on that. No question about it. She knows her Bible better than Charlie Kirk knows his. Yeah, I mean, so I look. I mean, the snotty answer is I think he's a true believer in markets and letting companies do what they want and, and all of that stuff, which I really think is the prime imperative of movement conservatives like him in general, which is why I wanted to do this debate to show that the whole populism thing was nonsense. But does he, Eric Kelly says, how much mail has Charlie lost his lifetime? Great debate, man. You destroyed him. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for the super chat. Eric is also one of the best humans ever because a long time ago he sent me a bottle of Japanese whiskey in the mail because he thought I might like it. But
USPS,
yeah, USPS, and it came. Right? Because as a matter of fact, they lose less stuff than Amazon and UPS does. Proportionally, it's just that it sounds like a lot when you rattle off the raw number because they deliver more packages. And in fact, Amazon heavily relies on USPS, but whatever.
Remember, I used the post office to send you a birthday box that year that we were doing long distance, and you were in Korea and I was in Miami.
Yeah, U.S. Postal Service.
Birthday box through the U.S. Postal Service, and you got it
in South Korea. So there you go.
It was amazing.
Yeah, and also seriously on Trey's question, which was about basically to paraphrase a little bit. Sort of churches mobilizing for progressive causes and workers and all that stuff. Yeah, I'm all for that. I mean, I really I mean, obviously the punchline was the thing about Jen, but I mean, I also really
I love being a punchline.
You know, well, you know, it also makes it a little bit harder to portray me as the like
that. Yeah,
know,
it definitely does.
Yeah. But also, like, in all seriousness, I also meant what I meant said about Jen, but I also meant what I said about Cornel West, that the Martin Luther King, that you know, that I look. When it comes to politics, if you don't want to impose your religion on me, then that's all I care about, right? Like I have no, the fact that I might have different beliefs about somebody on metaphysics, you know, we could agree to disagree about that. Well, we work on getting everybody a living wage and getting everybody health care and, you know, helping workers organize, they have some say on the job and all of
I don't even impose my religion on you.
I know, right?
So.
And you'd be way better positioned, you know, than most people. But like, I mean, that the you know, I mean, the church that you went to in New Jersey, the shout out to Reformed Church of Highland Park, which where, you know, in fact, their pastor there was a Green Party candidate for governor of New Jersey, and
does a lot for social justice. They take in refugees and work on getting rid of solitary confinement, and they do a lot of stuff. Very LGBT friendly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they have like a Pride Week, you know, got all the rainbow stuff, and you know, like they. And they'll do stuff like send volunteers to help undocumented immigrants, you know, who are going to like pay their traffic tickets and stuff to, like, you know, warn them basically if it looks like there's going to be an ICE raid, you know. So I mean, yeah, whatever. I mean, like I will certainly politically, I would much rather be in a movement with Christians like that than with, you know, like atheist libertarians, you know, any day of the week.
Yeah, I was in New Jersey this weekend. Rutgers was having a makeup graduation for the 2020 graduates, and I went for that, and I got to go to my old church. It was fantastic.
Ekin Erican says, sounds like some hippy dippy church. I would go to the kind of church where Pastor McDougal screeches about exorcisms and fanny packs. Yeah, I mean, I think. Yeah, actually, so Augie, hope I pronounced that right, says, I think the Catholic Church played a pivotal role in organizing the workers of the Mondragon Cooperative in Spain. I don't know the church as a whole did, but there was certainly a particular Catholic priest who founded that, which actually came up, a fun piece of trivia, very first debate I ever did in 2000, and either the end of 2018 or beginning of 2019, I don't remember, right? It was just with a couple of like random, you know, not that, I mean, I'm not saying that to denigrate them, but I mean, I just mean like not like people who are particularly public figures, but people have a YouTube channel who are like Jordan Peterson super fans. And I did one with them, and this Mondragon thing came up, and they brought up it being founded by a Catholic priest, and they said, like, oh, I guess what we need to go to cooperatives is more Marxist Catholic priests, huh, man? And my response was, well, you know, you do realize, right, that the reason we don't have more Marxist Catholic priests is that, like, CIA support death squads killed so many of them in the 80s, which, you know, like, is actually the serious point there, right? That they, and look, I mean, I also saw somebody in the chat bringing up all of the many terrible things, like, you know, they're talking about the Jesuits in Paraguay. You know, the point is not that you don't have people in all these religious traditions who do disgusting, vile things, you know, and use those traditions to support it. It's that you do have people in all of those traditions who do the opposite. And it seems to me that the latter should be encouraged. All right.
I'm down with that.
So Ben, I was doing a deep dive into the comments on Charlie's version of the video. I don't know if you checked that out, but I kind of said this in the chat, but I feel like a pretty good indicator of who won. Not that, you know, it's not all about winning, but they're all really upset for the most part, and like we're toasting, you know what I mean? And I've watched debates where, honestly, even before getting involved with the channel, I wasn't even the hugest fan of debates sometimes, because like most of the debates that we're exposed to are either so terrible or so stressful, right? Like when you're watching Trump and like Hillary debate. I'm no fan of Hillary, right? But the question of whether we're going to have neoliberalism or fascism take over the country, right? And you know that Trump in his own way is doing a good job, right? Even if he's like not making any good arguments. But watching this,
whatever else you want to say about Trump, he was a talented insult comic. But what you said.
Right. No, exactly. So I'm just saying though, but watching this, it was actually entertaining, and it, even helped me clarify some of my own, like, oh, that I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't seen that patented right-wing talking point, and that's there's a very good like the class. The best one I thought was when you were going into about how means testing actually makes things like less democratic, right, and increases cronyism, but. The point I'm making, though, is that I think that if you have a good time watching the debate, that's a pretty good indication of that your guy won, right? Like, so they're not happy over there.
Yeah. I mean, if they thought that Charlie did a good job, they would have enjoyed it. So,
I did see some comments that were like, Ben was civil. I believe in civil conversation. So I think that there are those swing people that you were able to reach to, so.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing too. I mean, that's the reason, that's the reason that I wasn't doing the equivalent of, waving dolphin fetus pictures in his face.
Ben is not aggressive. Ben is forceful, which I think is a good thing. And aggressive can be a bad thing, so.
Yeah, right, because I mean, the point is to like forcefully go after his beliefs, not like be rude to him as a person, because even if you think he deserves it, I mean, whatever your view is on that, like, what's the goal, right? If the goal is to do things that will make the audience you already have slow clap, then, you have one strategy, right? But if the goal, and, I mean, again, as you say, I think our audience really enjoyed that, but I think that if the primary goal is to reach whoever can possibly be reached in his audience, then if you come off as a dick, you're not gonna that's not gonna help you with that goal. Would be my take.
I would agree. Yeah, one of the guys from Town Circle came over to me in the middle of it and said, "Wow, I'm really impressed with Ben. That and both of them, that this isn't an aggressive debate, but Ben is really, getting his points across."
I kind of think that when Charlie saw how outclassed he was, he made the strategic shift to kind of being like, "We're just having a conversation," because you can't really get crushed in a conversation. I think, I mean, as much as we're having fun here, right? He has a huge channel. He has a huge audience. Yeah. His ideas are more popular than ours, right? So, which is something that can't be, or at least his, he has a bigger audience. So he clearly has good instincts for something, whether it's entertaining or arguing. I don't know what it is. You know what I mean?
Or he bought the bigger audience. You could make that argument, but.
Well, I mean, in a sense, right? I mean, like I think that. I think that's half true, that I mean, clearly, look, I mean, we've been in the Turning Point USA building.
In the green room.
Yeah.
With the fruit tray.
I mean, on the putting green.
The girl was like, "Do y'all want anything? Is there, are there any specific snacks and stuff we can have for you?" And Ben was like, no. And I was like, "I would like a fruit tray."
Yeah.
And
take advantage. Take it. Oh, sick. Take advantage.
Yeah. They asked if I had a rider or any special food or drink requests, and it crossed my mind that I could do some crazy rock star shit and like demand like a bowl of just the brown M&Ms or something. But I resisted temptation and said no, right. I'm good.
And just to clarify, I mean, I know like his opinions aren't necessarily more popular if you actually poll them, but I just mean these people are incredibly popular, right? So I mean, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I mean, look, like clearly, if the question is, are the individual policies that he supports necessarily popular? Sure, that's one question. In fact, that's half the point of the debate, to like show that despite the pretense to being a populist, he's opposed to all of these incredibly popular policies that would make life better for poor and working class people. But if the question is he personally much more popular than I am, than like anybody in our world, right? Like who have more people heard of, right? Charlie Kirk or Sam Cedar? In a just world it might be different, but in our world.
But what about from Bob's Burgers, though?
Yeah, if you say Hugo from Bob's Burgers, maybe a few more people, but but Charlie Kirk was spoke at the last Republican National Convention. Sam Cedar is not going to be invited to speak at the next Democratic National Convention. That ain't happening, right? Personally, right, he's a very prominent figure. He's popular. The question is, by the way, we are going to get back to that super chat. Don't worry, but
I just had to get that up there.
Sure. The one she got up there for anybody to listen to it later as a podcast is at J&R World. We need an image of Charlie Kirk and Ben sitting around a fruit tray after an image of them on a putting green. But
how come I don't get to be there with my fruit tray that I requested?
Yeah, she was the one who requested that. I didn't request anything. But the point is, right? Like, look, I'm well aware of the element of truth to what Ed is saying, that like they have ungodly amounts of money. That, like, I commented to several people after the debate. It's like, man, I really got a glimpse, right? Like, it must be nice to be able to do this kind of work in an environment where rich people are clearly driving like dump trucks full of cash up to your door all day, every day, that like, and so obviously they have this message, they have all this money that they can use to spread their message. So that's true. But also I think that the part that we have to grapple with is that wouldn't work if enough people didn't find something appealing about the message. That doesn't matter how many salesmen you've got if nobody's buying, right?
But the more salespeople you've got, the more people they're going to reach, and the more people they're going to buy.
Yeah. So I think all of that's true, but I think that clearly there are parts of the sales pitch that are resonating with at least some people. And so what I was trying to do is to zero in on the parts of that pitch that I think I'm in a position to chip away at. So one of those, again, as I admitted earlier, is Charlie does have a habit, and I don't think this was just a personal eccentricity. I think this is a rhetorical strategy, and I think a lot of conservatives do this, of trying to sort of have this veneer of classiness to his arguments by peppering in, whatever, Hegel and Rousseau and Plato and Aristotle and, and all that stuff. And, I thought that I'd be in a position, given my background training, to, poke a couple holes in that. And I think without tooting my own horn too much.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think mission accomplished, but then that's like the less important thing. But like the much more important thing and the main thing is is that I want to be able, I just want to like really make him defend all of the extremely unpopular positions that he takes and all of the positions that are just standard Republican conservative positions that are totally at odds with the populist rhetoric, right? You want to, like, oh no, you're not a corporate kind of, William Buckley conservative, you're a populist, you care about the little guy, but also let's not raise the little guy's wages. Let's not give him health care, let's not make it any easier for him or her, they to, organize a union, like that. That's, there's a contradiction there that I think the more we can hammer away at that in more ways, in more places, the better. And I think that my feeling is that there's a reason. I mean, what Anna Kasparian said in the chat, is a really important point. There's a reason that these guys always try to deflect as soon as possible. They always want to change the point to the culture war. Why is that? I think they're wrong about both, right? That would obviously be my view, but their culture war positions are ones that they're going to get sign off on from a much bigger chunk of the population, because that a lot of that stuff really really is a function of, as much as anything, of what region you live in, what cable news channels you watch, what kind of church you go to, whether you went to college or vaguely distrust people who went to college, whether you, all of that stuff, right? Like whether you have a bunch of friends who are gay or trans, or like you sort of vaguely fear people who are gay or trans, right? Like all of that stuff is going to like really polarize people. And it's not that I think we should ignore those things. I don't. I think at least some of those things that I mentioned are important, human rights issues. But I also think that they want that because that's the stuff that they'll get their base excited about, right? Like this is a line I've used before, and it's not original to me, but like there's a reason that the last CPAC meeting, right, Conservative Political Action Committee, the title was America Uncanceled, not America Don't Raise the Minimum Wage. Like they know that to the extent that they're talking about culture war stuff, that'll get their base excited. To the extent that they're talking about the fact that they don't want their base to earn any more money or to get health care, that is not going to have that effect. So I think anytime we can be like that image of Bernie Sanders when Maureen Dowd is interviewing him, and he's sitting at the booth and he's waving around that piece of paper with the list of topics he's willing to talk about. She's like, "Oh, what do you think AOC will be president?" He's like, "I only want to talk about the list," right? I think that's the right model. That just constantly, don't fight them on the terrain they want to fight on, right? Fight them on the terrain that's bad for them. It's almost like that line in Goodfellas. You had a bad week. Fuck you. Where's my money, right? Your place burned down. Fuck you. Where's my money, right? It's like, no. If you want to talk about families, great. Let's talk about unions and the minimum wage. Oh, you want to talk about immigration? Great. Let's talk about unions and the minimum wage. Oh yeah. I mean, that's the, you think, immigrants are stealing jobs or whatever. It's like, why not give them a path to citizenship so they'll, they're more willing to join unions and sue their employers when their employers are violating labor laws, and which, by the way, is much more family friendly, I would think, than ripping children from their mother's arms like the Trump administration did.
Or separating them like how Obama did, but because he did that's actually how he got most of his deportations, was going after families.
Yeah, So I think that there are certain respects in which Trump made an already bad thing much worse. But there are also respects in which there's continuity there. There's much larger problem, right? Garrett, exactly. F you, where's my Medicare for all? Yeah. So, I do not want to miss, because there was a super chat with a question in it. Let me see if I can still find it.
That was it.
Okay. Ivan says, what do you think about the logic bro / girls, the nerd version of the culture war? First time I heard about metaphysics was for the right. Well, there you go. And so that's why we need to talk about it here. It's like, we don't want people learning about metaphysics on the streets. But getting it from, shady right-wing people. But look, I guess I will just shamelessly plug my book, which you can actually see behind me, for the logic bro / girl question, because that is kind of a lot of what my first book, also called Give Them an Argument, is about, is sort of kind of tried to counter both the annoying, often libertarian logic bro type who sort of treats being able to rattle off the names of logical fallacies as a as a way of showing how smart they are without really using it in a thoughtful way. But also then maybe leftists who might overreact to it by kind of rolling their eyes whenever anybody starts using language about logical fallacies, whatever, and just sort of try to, third way that and say these could be useful intellectual tools, but like these people aren't using them right.
My critical thinking class just had an exam that was totally on logical fallacies, and they did wonderfully. I just want to say that.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I got an A- in formal logic in college. the proudest grade I ever got. I really got a B+, but like my TA was like, he tried really hard. Like he worked really hard. But it's funny.
If you got the B, you could be the producer for this show.
Yeah, exactly. But it is funny because on not to harp on the comments, but it's just it's almost like sociologically interesting for me to see, like, because we can kind of have laboratory, right? Like our folks' response and their response. A lot of them are like, yeah, Charlie just destroyed Ben with logic, but I didn't see one example from the actual debate. So it is kind of like maybe to the point of the logic bros, maybe like a fetishization of logic where you get to just say, kind of like how the new Trump platform is truths are like instead of tweets, he has truths in his new social media platform, right? Where it's like you're just asserting this logic is correct, or you're asserting that this is truthful without actually, like, it's almost like a use mention problem again, where you're not using logic, you're just like appealing to logic as this authority. So I'm driving Ben to drink even more. Yeah. But yeah, it does seem like there's this weird fetishization of these concepts,
Yeah.
I think Silver is right. We are going to have to come up with a new fallacy name for people who use fallacy or name fallacies and don't know what they are.
Right.
Isn't that an ad hominem you just did, Jen?
No, I was telling you what Silver said.
Like, can we clarify when Charlie said, I wanted to figure out exactly what logical fallacy he used. He says, it's like, you're saying that the British healthcare system is better, but I can't believe that because I know the government is bad. So what fallacy is that? Because he's assuming
is that a fallacy or is that just idiocy?
But it is like an appeal to I'm not sure.
I mean,
it says I know the government is bad, so appeal to stupid.
Yeah. I mean, I guess. I mean, I think it's just I don't think it's a fallacy necessarily. I think it's just. Maybe it's a fallacy, but if it's okay. If it's a fallacy, it's maybe like
a non sequitur.
Well, I was thinking like maybe like division, like government is bad, therefore every single individual component of government is bad. So that could be an example of division fallacy. Yeah. I mean, unless his premise is like every single component of the government is bad, in which case it's just a weird false premise.
False premise, yeah, I guess.
But also, like, I don't think that is his premise because he went on at one point about how much he loves cops and firefighters and whatever.
We want a nimble, strong government that
a government that's exactly strong enough to do ICE raids on churches and neighborhoods and like people who are like trying to pay their traffic tickets and literally tear like little kids away from the arms of their mothers, and like exactly strong enough to do that, but not strong enough to give us health care because that would be too much power.
Exactly.
Local and accountable like the police.
Yeah. Yes, the famously accountable police and the famously local ICE.
Yes.
Yeah. Ben, what?
That one.
What did
that one?
Oh.
I would watch Fallacy or Idiocy hosted by Ben and Jen.
Yeah. What did Charlie mean when he said both? I don't know. Anybody else want to take a shot at that one?
He meant I don't understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
I mean, you told him that, you know, like what justifies these things is not the same thing as how we know. And he couldn't, because every time you said just God, he would be like, yes. Just it's like a Pavlovian response. God, yes. God, yes. And I think that was all he could manage, really.
Yeah. I think that he was basically saying he didn't understand the question, because it seemed like when he explained both, he was just off topic. He was like, oh, here are different ways you can know what God wants. Like, oh, okay,
that's
but
not
that
the point.
has nothing to do with the question.
Yeah.
And then there seemed like a point where he made a breakthrough and he actually like understood the question, but then he refused to answer it because he was like, well, I reject the premise. I was like, yeah, but it's an if, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no, I'm not asking you to believe, that God doesn't exist. I'm saying, if that were the case, would this other thing be true? And that doesn't, like, just saying like, well, I don't think it is the case. That seems like not an answer to that question, like, at all.
Nope.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something, just trying to grapple. I guess I'm grappling with this popularity after seeing, like, how poor he did in that debate. But I guess maybe there's something that feels good about saying both, even if it doesn't. Like, you're forcing him into something logically, but he doesn't actually have to go with it. He could just say an answer that feels good, and maybe it's like it's telling people what they want to hear. I guess is that I don't have to choose, right? I don't have to make that choice. So,
and I mean, back in 2019, it came out like, who the fan base is. It's not, the youth. It's people over 65. So like that's the majority of their fans is the young Republicans who are almost retired and not the retired ones that Fox has.
Yeah, I mean, he does. I mean, I think it is true that like there are a lot of right-wing students who follow it, but I'm also be very unsurprised if like the majority of actual viewers are older, because the majority of conservatives are older, at least disproportionately tend to be older, maybe not the majority. And I think a lot of conservatives might be like, oh, thank God, a young person who's talking some sense.
Yeah, well, we know our audience is all Gen Z, right? Which is why we're moving the show to TikTok.
Yeah, well, I don't think it skews elderly. I think it skews towards like 29-year-old graduate students whose girlfriends are sick of like having them like like rant about Sam Harris. Like that's
yeah, I'm in this picture and I don't like it. That's not exactly me, but I feel personally attacked. So what do you think, Ben? You think closing thoughts on the whole experience, unless you're trying to go till midnight, but I feel like we might want to let our fans go to bed.
Yeah.
And us.
I did make a link.
I have grading to do.
I did make a link just in case for a post game, but I was thinking there was like a 3/4 chance we would not use it, and I think we're not going to use it because we try to end that at 11 and we're at 11:34. So I think the time is here I think the time is here to stop that. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Right? I hope the Zoomers are watching the show. That'd be nice.
I mean, my Zoomers are in bed, so.
All right, they can watch tomorrow. Yeah, I don't know. I was extremely happy about this. I will say that. I mean, I was happy that night in Phoenix, and then. There's inevitably because my God, right? We had like 3 weeks, that went by, right? Before we could air this, or 3 weeks before even they aired it, So I got the recording, and it's hard not to like second guess yourself over the course of those weeks and think like, I don't know, maybe I was too nice, I let him off easy or whatever. And then Thursday night, he put it out on his podcast feed. I the whole 2 hours, and I listened to it. I was like, oh no, that was good.
I don't know why you didn't just trust me in the first place.
Well, you might be biased.
Nope.
I think Jen is always right. So
yeah, philosophers can't be biased. Philosophers can't be biased. It's pure logic. I think for my part, Ben, I would say it could be the whiskey talking a little bit, but not to get too deep. But I think both as a union organizer, right, and someone who just had an anti-vaccine pro-Kyrie rally right outside his apartment the other day, it can be easy to kind of literally I could hear them shouting, break out of the matrix, like the most arrhythmic chants you ever heard, but it can be easy to kind of like lose hope in the ability of the left to even persuade or make an argument. So I think watching this and also enjoying it with the chat gave me a little hope. So it was great to watch.
I am very glad to hear that.
And on the point of this generations watching thing, we just found out that Ben's mom was watching.
She was.
Shout out to Kathy.
Kathy.
Just got a text from her. She's going to bed now.
Yeah. I hope she's still here for hi Kathy.
No way my 80-year-old dad could watch it live, but I look forward to having discussing all the topics with him tomorrow.
Yeah,
because he watches every episode.
Oh wow, okay. Thank you, Logan, for the super sticker. Really appreciate that. So I will I guess while we've got I think about 100 people have gone to bed, but while we still got 224 people watching, I will just say a couple things. First of all, if you enjoyed this,
and who didn't,
like and subscribe. We got more where this came from. If you want to give all these nice people that you see on the screen, keep their lights on and everything, and you want to see more of this kind of thing happening, we have to travel or whatnot, please do consider joining the patreon.com/Ben Burgis. You get, we're not doing it now as we established, but normally every Monday night after the main show, there's a patron exclusive post game. Those are often a lot of fun. A couple ago, we exposed Jason Miles to the Rod Dreher stuff about, what is it, the black kid with the monstrous, and the primitive root weeder. That's right, and the exorcisms and all that stuff. So we got the Patreon exclusive post game every Monday night after the main show. Have the patron exclusive bonus episodes that drop every Saturday.
Follow me on Twitter.
That's
free.
We just did one, at Prof Jen Burgis with 2 N's. We just did one where a bunch of Jackman writers and an editor from the Indians Times watched Many Saints of Newark, and we talked about it. Lots of fun. You also get a pretty active Discord, lots of fun discussions there. And again, most importantly, if you like what we're doing here, if you want to support it, it's not, all of these things are ways of saying thank you for doing it. I guess also there are the monthly Sopranos recaps with non-known laws and Mike Racine. But all of these things are things that we do to say thank you for the support, but the real thing is not like, the $5 a month so you can get all this stuff. I mean, we're awash in free content. The real thing is if you support what we do and you want us to continue doing it, this is a way to do that. Also, I am going to be teaching a class, that thing I said the first 10 seconds of the debate, the equality of opportunity thing. That really comes from G.A. Cohen, his book Why Not Socialism. So we're going to be doing a class in December where we read that book. We read Jason Brennan, who's a libertarian philosopher, his critique of it. We talk about the whole thing. Should be a lot of fun. That's Speakeasy. We'll put a link to that in the description for this episode. But with that, I think we are.
You're through plug-in stuff?
I think I'm through plug-in stuff. Also, if you're, I guess I'm not.
This is my life, y'all.
He's always plugging stuff to you.
If you're here for the first time on Thursday nights, so both Monday and Thursday, show starts at 8. Monday we have these regular episodes, and then the post game for patrons. On Thursdays we have Thursday night debate breakdowns where we watch other debates.
And you will see me here on Mondays.
Yes,
I am a regular shower upper on Mondays.
Yeah, that's the official title.
MVP. MVP of the show.
We still don't have an official title for our philosophy segment yet. And I think that's Jake's job to be coming up with that.
Yeah, I think so. On the spot, yeah. I was doing Bleeding Teacher's Pet, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have been on MR before. I think
what is MR?
Majority Report. So Hugo from Bob's Burgers. So yeah, I think 4 times actually. Yeah, 4 times because I was on twice when Michael was alive. He, on like they used to do Michael Thursdays where he'd solo host. He had me on a couple times for that, but I've been on twice with Sam, in the last several months. So, that is as good a note as anything we're going to get. Thank you so much for the super chat, Champagne Humanist. But that is as good as we're going to get for a final note to cap off the evening from our good friend, regular commenter Yoda 7104. Legendary night, legendary chat. Left is best, folks. Good night.
Team Snoopy forever.